In 2013, I moved with my family to a foreclosed 6-bedroom home on 14 acres straight up in the middle of nowhere in the Poconos. My father and I noticed very weird things going on the second we moved in, but my mother and sister seemed to not notice these things. Everyone besides me and my dad and the entire family are the "oh, it was the wind" type of people, if you get what I mean. There's some evidence that the entire area of where this house is located is haunted, as in ghosts and Native American burial grounds and other things. Now, historically speaking, with actual evidence, people settled here around the old mill area long ago and brutally killed many Iroquois Indians. The area is very spread out over miles of heavily wooded mountains. 2 weeks ago, my uncle on my mother's side and his girlfriend came to visit my parents' home. They do this quite often, as my parents always have people over for beer, games, bonfires, etc. I just want to start off by saying my uncle is a non-believer, a Harley rider who to this day I've never seen him really scared of anything or anyone before this sighting. My uncle and his girlfriend are playing foosball with my parents when they realize it's 12:30 a.m, so they decide to head home. They take all back roads, and once they turn onto Running Valley Road, 6 minutes from the house, my uncle's girlfriend sees two figures. They were pretty far away at this point, but it was two small figures waiting to cross the road. Just to mention, there was nothing else here. No houses, besides one abandoned one that was still 2 miles up the road. Only thing in the vicinity is a cave. These figures were attempting to cross the road to go into the woods, which was very odd because of the time and location. They're now approaching these figures. Headlights start to shine directly on them. Both my uncle and his girlfriend see two young girls aged around 10, one much bigger than the other, wearing what my uncle best describes as early 1900s church clothing, like dresses to the knee, with white cotton shawls or cropped sweaters and flats. Weird, right? What the fuck are two 10-year-olds doing at 12:30 in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, wearing church clothing? They also noticed the bigger child had her arms wrapped around the smaller one, like you would do if she was hurt, scared, or cold. At this point, my uncle's girlfriend is like, "It's children, we need to stop and help." Now at this point, the truck is almost right next to the little girls. Both had their heads held down. So then the bigger of the two starts to pick her head up to look at the passing vehicle. Then both my uncle and his girlfriend notice the girl has no eyes. Just black holes as if they were carved straight from her face. Girlfriend says, "What the fuck was that? You saw that, right? Oh my God, turn around and go back right now." My uncle, scared shitless, takes the fuck off, flying to get home. Then they get home and get into an argument because she wants to drive back and see what was up. Grabs her own car keys, and my uncle basically was like, "You're not going back there. We are never going on that road again." He calls my parents in an extreme panic, tells them, and they start bugging because they know he would never lie or be that freaked out if it wasn't warranted. So my mom starts to tell me everything. Mind you, my fam knows nothing of black-eyed kids, never heard of it before. I send my mom an article to forward to my uncle with some of the very basic info. Young kids, no eyes, dreadful feeling, sometimes outdated clothing, hitchhiking or at your door, looking for help, etc. So this is just some weird experience my husband and I have had over the past 2 years, on top of a few others. We've noticed it come and go, and we've never been harmed, but we can't sleep due to the amount of strange activity. About 2 years ago, in May I believe, I exited my shower. It was about midday and sunny out. My big bay window, fuzzy for privacy, lets all the sun in so the master bathroom is always well lit. I dried off, toweled down my hair, and slipped on a t-shirt with biking shorts. As I was scrunching my hair with some leave-in conditioner, I felt a distinct tug on the back of my shirt, about the level a 3 to 5-year-old would be able to reach. Nothing was there when I turned around, but the room was freezing suddenly, to the point I saw little puffs of breath. The same thing happened to my husband a few weeks later, and there were tiny puddles of child-sized footprints on the tiles. It shook us both badly. After that, it got worse. Any time we showered or went to lie down to sleep, there was always this vibe in the room. The air was thick and humid, enough that I had a horrible time breathing due to my asthma. My husband's had begun having horrible nightmares so vivid and real that I had to once slap him to get him to truly wake up. He becomes so disoriented and confused that he's thrashed around and fallen out of bed. I've never seen him like this. He doesn't have mental health issues. We even went to a doctor, then therapist/psychiatrist to be sure. They called them night terrors and left it at that. But he keeps seeing a huge black figure with whites for eyes and horrifically large teeth. He said he's never seen anything like it before and has to take a pretty good-sized dose of melatonin to help him sleep at night. It's really wearing on him. I've noticed a darker spot in the corner of our room, about 7 feet tall, and it's so black that normal black can't properly describe it. It's like that Vanta black or whatever they call it. I recently saw something while in the shower, through the shower door, fuzzy for privacy. I thought I saw a little grey figure about the size of a child standing in the middle of our master bathroom. I didn't have my glasses on, so this figure was very, very fuzzy, but distinct due to the white door it was standing in front of. It must have heard me gasp because the door swung open violently, and I could hear the sound of bare feet smacking against the wooden floors. I dashed out of the shower and threw my robe on, trying to catch up to the kids. I had my glasses on by then and could make out little wet footprints about the size of my 4-year-old nephew's feet. The entire house was checked. Doors were locked, windows locked. No way could a kid get in otherwise. Our 2 cats refused to sleep with us anymore and hiss at the threshold of the master bedroom. That's not like them at all. They're snug bugs and big babies. What the hell is going on in our house? Back when I was a kid, I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot, as it was both closer to school and my parents were working long hours. There was also a homeless guy in that area who was also drunk and would scare the children on the street. He was called Steve, and people started using him as a bogeyman for children that would misbehave even long after he either left the area or passed away. I don't know what happened to him. I remember it was around the same time of the year in 1996 because I had just gotten the Nintendo 64 for my birthday immediately after it was released in North America. I was so enamored with the console that I absolutely refused to go to bed and kept on playing the game. My exasperated grandparents tried to get me to bed by first switching off the lights and then telling me that Steve will come and get me. When that didn't work, they started saying, "Look, Steve is already in the backyard." I decided to take a peek at the window, and lo and behold, there was a humanoid figure darker than the night at the window. I was extremely scared and started crying. At first, my grandparents played along, but when they realized that I was genuinely scared, they started saying that there's nothing outside. Yet, I could see this humanoid figure at the window. They tried to comfort me and turned on the lights, and the figure vanished, but when they turned the lights back off, the figure reappeared. After insisting a lot that the figure was there, My grandpa took me outside to show me that no one was there, and indeed, no one was there. I went to bed and rarely since thought of it again, usually chalking up to my overly active childish imagination. Now, as my grandma thinks she doesn't have much time left, she decided to renovate the house so she can leave a beautiful house to be sold by us when she's gone. My uncle and I have been doing most of the work. The incident that triggered my memory happened this weekend, when my uncle brought his family over, including his 5-year-old daughter. We decided to spend the night there to both keep my grandma company and to do the last finishing touches. At night, as we were preparing to head off to bed, my 5-year-old cousin just asked my uncle, "Who's that man outside?" I looked as well out the window, but couldn't see anything, nor could any of the other adults. However, she kept insisting that there's a man watching through the window, and she started crying and acting all terrified, just like I did 25 years ago. So now I wonder, if two children roughly the same age see the same thing and act pretty similarly, is it just a coincidence? Or could there be something more sinister to it? I wonder what your thoughts are. Husband, 9-month-old and I, sleeping in our bedroom and have experienced odd happenings over the last 3 weeks. I was asleep the first night, so was our baby in his crib, and husband was awake watching TV on his phone with headphones in. He heard a noise and took out the headphones. While this is happening, I'm having a nightmare that an evil presence is trying to get into our room. Husband hears loud tapping on the window and I wake up. I'm groggy as fuck and he asks, "Did you hear that?" I nod my head because a noise woke me, but I don't really know what the noise was. Remember, my dream was absolutely terrifying, so I wake up thinking it's not a dream and that something really is trying to get inside our room. My heart is pounding and I'm full of this depressing dread. Hubby gets up and looks out back the door window. Keep lights turned off. He grabs a knife from the kitchen and opens the door. There is nobody. Our husky is staring at the side of our house, fixated on something. But when husband goes outside, there's nothing there. He goes back inside and our baby is screaming and crying because he heard the noise as well. Our son sleeps through the night every night. We also sleep with the fan on full speed to create a sound barrier to help him stay asleep. Second time, several days later, I wake up to hubby opening our door and shining his flashlight on the phone into the living room. He kept hearing a thumping on the walls. Again, our son wakes screaming. Third time, I wake to the dog barking in our backyard. And I hear a noise, but again can't be sure what it was since I was asleep and I'm groggy as fuck. Husband was awake again watching TV and swears he heard a door open and shut in the living room, but the door was locked. Again, son wakes up crying. On Saturday, we put a 30-year-old crucifix that was blessed in a church in Mexico in our room, against the window where the knocking occurred, and haven't had any disturbances since. I feel like there's still a muted, disturbing presence, but since putting up the crucifix, I feel safe. My great-grandpa was a World War II veteran that died of polio, I want to say 12 or 13 years ago. I went with my grandma years later to his grave to place flowers. At this cemetery, they had metal flower vases that were tall and skinny and would flip upside down and recess into a hole. With a twist, it locked into place. It was also kept there by a chain. All of this, sadly, was to deter theft. When I tried to twist it, it came undone, but I couldn't lift it out. Me and my grandma took turns trying to lift it, but couldn't. I had heard stories about great grandpa before his polio, and he was always known to be a prankster and light-hearted. I told my grandma, it's almost like grandpa is messing with us. And out of nowhere, it lifted out of the hole. It's like he was there, and when I pointed it out, he knew the jig was up and let go. I still couldn't help but laugh through the tears. Even in death, he kept his sense of humour. It was evening, and I went out the back field to watch the sunsets as usual. The view was best there, and the sunlight always looked cool over the trees. I took the 15-ish minute walk on the gravel road that connects all of our land. Through the gates, over the creek, past the pond, and finally into the back field. I watched it set over the trees until I couldn't get a view of it anymore. It was starting to get dark, so I decided to go back home, until I saw something. At the other side of the field, right across from me, I saw what looked like a buck staring right at me. And while it's not abnormal to see a deer out there, it's odd that it didn't get spooked by me being out there. Since my mom hunts in those woods, I got my phone out to take a picture of it to show her. But the sun had basically set, so all you can see in the picture is a silhouette. That's when it started getting weird. I looked up from the picture and saw the silhouette change. It got taller, like the deer stood up on its back legs and just stood there, motionless. For way too long. Feeling uneasy, but trying not to get scared, I casually put my phone back in a pocket and started walking home. It was getting quite dark after all, and it's just a wild deer, nothing to be scared of, right? So I turned my back to the deer and began walking, but something felt wrong. It's like I could feel someone staring at me, or something. I quickly looked over my shoulder, but saw nothing. It was very dark now, so all I would be able to see is shadow anyway. I saw nothing until I saw something. The deer. But it was wrong, so wrong. Just typing this out is making me uneasy. It was still standing upright, just like it was before I started walking home. But it was running, straight running towards me. That's when I knew something was wrong. This isn't normal, and I better start running. I sprint through the gate and get onto the gravel road, screaming for someone to help me. My bare feet getting torn up by the sharp rocks I'm running over. Fumbling with my phone as I ran, I called my dad, who was thankfully home. Hello? Someone is chasing me! I don't hesitate to tell him, obviously, especially since the deer is gaining. About half the distance away it was when I first saw it running. I can hear my dad on the other end of the phone, slamming the front door open and running outside. But I can't hear or see the thing behind me. It's black dark out now, and all I see is a shadow getting 50, 40, 30 feet away. I tear through the creek bed as I run through it, finally seeing my house lights in the distance. I scream as loud as I've screamed my entire life, the breath scratching my lungs as I do so. I'm running uphill now, not stopping once this entire time. And I finally see my dad in front of me, running even faster than I am. He jumps the last gate separating me from my house and starts yelling, "Get away, get away, get..." When he finally reaches me, instead of stopping at me, he keeps running past me and keeps yelling. I fall to the ground, barely able to catch a breath, tears streaming down my face. After maybe 20 seconds, my dad kneels next to me. "Did you see it?" I force out of my trembling lungs. I didn't see anything. Apparently, whatever chased me was afraid of my dad. because once he was in view, it ran away. He is a pastor, so if this was a demonic spirit, it makes complete sense that it left once my dad got to me. Now, it's been a year since that happened. I'm made fun of by most people because everyone thinks it was just a sickly deer with rabies or something, even my parents. But my great uncle, who's literally an expert on wildlife, says there's no way. He says it was most likely a bear, but a bear hasn't been seen here for 30 plus years. And I don't think bears have antlers. I was in bed at around midnight yesterday. I usually go to bed around 10 p.m, but procrastinated some work and stayed up late to finish it. So when I went to bed, I set an alarm for 7 in the morning, tucked myself in, and waited for sleep to come to me. However, it didn't. I checked my phone time and time again, watching the hours pass by. Then, at around 3:30, my dog, who usually stays beside my bed, suddenly starts whimpering at the bedroom door to be let out. So I get out of bed to let him out, but that's when I notice that he isn't sitting at the bedroom door to be let out, but staring at the bed unflinchingly, even when I call his name multiple times. I decided to sit beside him with my pillow and hopefully doze off. I slept and didn't dream. I woke up at 7 due to my alarm and started running errands. I forgot about the incident at night until my friend came to my house. He was noticeably worried and asked me if everything went well last night. After I told him what happened, he starts sweating and asks me to get out and come to his house. He believes in the paranormal, and I didn't. I do now. He tells me to have a seat and starts narrating a dream which he had. Apparently in his dream, he saw everything I did that night, but from the perspective which was on the bed. He told me in his dream that at around 3:30, my dog just started staring at him for an hour, which he did in reality too. Strangely, my friend had an extremely vivid description of everything, and some things I hadn't told him about, such as my water bottle being empty that night and my laptop charger still plugged in and not put away. He also said something which gave me the chills. He said that he wanted to hurt me in his dream. His goal was to apparently take my nails off and stab me with them. It seemed extremely unnatural and unsettling, so we both went back into my house. However, what I saw next made me a believer in the paranormal too. A human nail on my bed, intact. Not a small piece, the full nail. It scared me because that means it was planted there by something. Currently, I'm at my friend's house and we're both terrified. I'm thinking of sleeping at my parents' house for the next few days. My dog is fine and not acting any different. But could someone please explain what the hell I experienced? And whose nail could it have been? When I was a baby, my parents bought an old house in an historical society that used to be a toll house way back in the day. It's approximately 315 years old, but I think I'm lowballing that. I had never felt completely safe in that house for the 25 years I lived there. When I was a kid, I thought it was normal to just always feel like you were being watched and to feel something hanging on your back. I wasn't allowed to go over people's houses or have anybody over until I got to around middle school. I remember going to a friend's normal modern house when I was 12 and immediately feeling safe and private. I didn't feel eyes burning into me. It was so strange to feel that, and I remember dreading going home. I didn't fully click that my house was odd though until friends came over and they said my house was creepy. I remember going to the bathroom while they were waiting in my bedroom. My dad was asleep in bed and my mom was in her office working, one floor and several rooms adjacent away. I came back from the bathroom and they had asked me who I was talking to. I said, I wasn't talking at all. I was in the bathroom. And I remember my one friend telling me that she heard two women whispering just outside my door. She thought I was talking to my mom. That moment really chilled me. They were afraid to sleep in my room and ended up staying awake all night. I remember most nights when I would go to bed, I would feel like a man was watching me through my window. I slept on the second floor. It felt like there would be somebody standing on the roof watching me, even though I know there physically was nobody there. I begged my mom for years to get curtains, but she refused. She refused to put any curtains up in the house, and I always felt watched from the roof and backyard. I eventually put up blankets to feel safe, but I still felt eyes burning into me. We had a decently furnished basement where my brother and I had all our video game stuff. Anytime I brought friends down, they would always ask to go back upstairs instead, but never said why. I grew to love and hate the basement, as it was a respite from my mother. But then I would have to deal with the door opening and shutting by itself, as well as feeling hands on my ankles from time to time if I tried to nap. I remember one time asking my brother if he ever experienced that, and he said he would often feel a sensation of a hand by his feet, but ignored it because it was that or deal with my mother. Not getting into that kind of worms, but yes, we preferred being terrified instead of dealing with our mother, lol. It soon became a running joke not to go into the basement unless you wanted to get grabbed. And it became normal to just feel fucking uncomfortable down there at all times. Not many things happened to me physically at that house. Almost always it was feelings of being watched, or seeing a figure in my peripheral only to turn and nothing be there. There are a few more things of note that I can think of now, and one is that there were regularly footsteps in my parents' bedroom. But unlike anything else that happened in that house, this was comforting. In the summer, we would sleep on my parents' floor because it saved on AC. I would stay up very late on my Game Boy while my parents slept, but frequently the sound and feeling of footsteps would go by me on the floor. This was when I was very young, and it was just a normal thing, and they made me feel safe, like whoever was walking around was making sure everything was all right. Even as I got older and would sit in the room directly below, if I heard the footsteps up while my parents were in other rooms, I kind of felt at ease, and like whoever was up there wanted me to know they were there. Also, we had quite a large backyard, about an acre of land, and it was really pretty, but I would often have terrifying nightmares of it most nights. I would have had bad dreams about people dragging me out there, or wild animals attacking me while figures watched. I honestly believe people may have died out there. I stayed out of the backyard as much as possible when I lived there, and those dreams plagued me for years. The last thing I can think of off the top of my head was when I was in the senior year of high school. My mum and I were really at odds, as I was the only child left in the house. She kept asking me to sleep on the floor in the living room. At this point in my life, she slept on the couch and my dad slept in the bed because he genuinely snores so loud she couldn't take it. I really didn't want to sleep in there with her. The living room has 4 large windows, 2 facing outside and 2 facing the backyard. I hated it. I reluctantly agreed, and I remember her leaving the TV on some animal channel when she fell asleep. I was laying on the floor with my phone when suddenly I felt a full hand, palm and fingers lay on the back of my head and very quickly shoved my head down into the pillow. I'm getting anxious just typing about it. The only people home were my mom, myself and my dad. I could hear my dad snoring upstairs and my mom was 5 feet away on the couch. I was utterly terrified and I yelled, "Stop!" and hid under my pillow in fear. My mom freaked out and had no idea what was going on. I was too afraid to move. She didn't believe me when I told her what had happened. And I remember going back up to my bedroom and praying to whatever God would listen to keep me safe from whatever had done that. I could still feel the phantom sensation of that hand. And I remember basically never going into the living room again after that, unless it was daytime and somebody else was with me. The older I got, the less safe I felt in that house. I eventually isolated myself to my bedroom when I wasn't at school or work, so I couldn't fall asleep until 8 or 9 in the morning. I just always felt watched. I started buying white and black candles from the local pagan store, as they told me white was to promote positive energy and black was to protect my mind. You can imagine, after 25 years of weird shit and feeling unsafe, I was willing to try anything to keep me feeling somewhat sane. It helped a lot, but maybe it was just a placebo. Who knows? Now, I live in an apartment very far away from that house and experience zero paranormal things. I don't feel watched, I don't feel scared, I don't have nightmares, and I finally feel safe. I hate going there to visit my parents. This happened about 13 years ago, when I was around 10 years old. Me and my little friends were always looking for some trouble to get ourselves into. Our favourite was making homemade boards for communicating with ghosts. We wanted to experience something scary, or so we thought. I'm not proud of this moment, as I now realise it was extremely disrespectful for us to do so. But bear in mind, I was only 10. A very small baby passed away, and a couple of days after, the grandma also passed away. 2 deaths in one house must mean that we can finally communicate with a ghost. So, we took our homemade board and went a little bit further from the house, so we wouldn't get in trouble but still close to where we could see the porch. We set up everything and grabbed each other's hands. We closed our eyes and started focusing on ghostly stuff or whatever. I felt a sudden urge to open my eyes, and I took a look at the porch of the house. There was a tall woman wearing a long black dress. She was looking down, so I couldn't see anything besides that. At first, I thought it might be the mother of the baby. People in my country wear black after a close member's death, so it's not uncommon. She lifted her head up, and that's when I felt my heart drop, and the hair of my body just stood up. She had no face, but I could tell that she was looking right at me. You know those moments when you're terrified, but for whatever reason you just can't move, can't scream, you just watch in horror? After the initial shock, I managed to let out the most intense scream I've ever done. My friends took one look at me and then looked at the direction I was looking at, and they started screaming too. We ran so fast, we couldn't catch our breath when we got to my house. I've never been so scared in my life. After we managed to catch our breath, I decided to ask what everyone saw. A faceless lady staring right at us. Without me telling them what I saw, that was everyone's answer. I'm not claiming that we saw a ghost. We were very young, and maybe there are some explanations as to what happened. Maybe we wanted to see something so bad that we created a scare out of nothing. What confuses me though, is how did we all see the exact same thing? In May earlier this year, I woke up on a Monday morning no different to any other. I sleep with my phone charging on the bedside table next to me, and when I wake up, the first thing I do, rather unhealthily, is check my messages before getting up. I took my phone off charge, and upon unlocking it, I found that I must have locked it the previous night with the camera app open. I hadn't been using the camera, so I figured I knocked the camera app when locking it before sleep. I didn't think anything of it, but did notice that the flash had also been changed in the settings to be permanently on, which I never have, and it's not easy to knock on by accident. As I turned this setting off, I saw the camera roll icon had a new photo in it. This is the point that I realised something really weird had happened. The picture on my phone, I still have it there, was taken at 2:21 a.m. with my bed on the side that I usually lay on. I sleep alone in a double bed. It was clearly taken in the pitch black, but with the flash on, and it was taken with the back camera. At first, I wondered if I had somehow woken up in the night and checked my phone, accidentally taken a selfie and then gone back to sleep, and then forgotten the whole thing as I was so tired. But it was a back camera photo of my pillow, and I'm not there. The angle of the picture is really creepy, as it is as if it was taken whilst kneeling on my bed in the dark, looking down on where would be myself. Now, logically, the only thing that makes sense, I think, but please give me more suggestions, is that I sleepwalked, taking my phone off charge, turning the flash on, and deciding to stand/kneel on my bed and take a photo of where I was sleeping, then locking my phone and putting it back on charge before getting back into bed. Bear in mind, I have never slept walk, slept talk, etc. in my life, let alone acted as some sort of sleepy creep. I gave my brother a bit of a hard time that morning, making sure he hadn't pranked me or something, and he was equally as scared as me. We noticed that my clock had stopped working that night too, and he wondered if psychologically, when the clock stopped ticking, it interfered with my sleep. But it had stopped in the later hours of the morning after the photo was taken. I guess I just want to discuss this as a non-sleepwalker, as I'm sure these things are fairly usual for some people. Something just doesn't feel right about it. Even if I did just do something strange in my sleep, I hate the thought that I was wandering around in the middle of the night in the dark and have no recollection of it. That really creeps me out. What was my sleepy mind trying to take a photo of? I thought about installing a motion sensor camera to see if I have started sleepwalking or something. But I don't want to see something that will unsettle me forever. My parents and I were driving very early on a rural road on our way to a winery. As it was still early, the sun had not risen yet, and we were driving with the high beams on, and would occasionally switch to the low beams when a random truck would drive by. To explain the situation, I have to mention that my father was the driver. I was shotgun, and my mom was in the back seat, but was still looking at the road as we were having a conversation and admiring the scenery. The conversation stilled when, without blinking, I, and apparently my parents too, saw a man walking right in the middle of the road. I didn't just blink, and he didn't just come into the lights from obscurity. The man materialized himself in the middle of the road and was looking at us. This couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds, but in my mind, it took hours. I thought he would see us driving and swerve, or at least stop coming closer to where we were about to drive through. But he didn't, and we didn't stop driving. We drove right through him, and he disappeared a millimeter away from the car, just as weird as he had appeared. It wasn't an illusion. I saw him very clearly, and he looked just like a regular man. Not see-through, and not scary at all. Nobody in the car said anything, and I was too on edge to start talking as I thought I was insane. My dad stopped at the nearest gas station, got out of the car, and started checking it. But the car presented no sign of crashing into anything. We hit a very big rabbit once, and I'm sure a man would do a much bigger damage than that. My mom and I also got out, and at this point, it was obvious to me that he was checking to see if we ran over anything, so I asked, "Did you see him too?" I think he was relieved that he was not imagining things, but also scared that we all saw what we thought to be a person. He said he did, and that we shouldn't talk about it. My mom just gave me the look that meant she would tell me later. As soon as I was just the two of us, I couldn't help but ask her what happened. Why did Dad not want to talk about it? And why did he continue driving when there was something that we thought was a man in the middle of the road? She told me it happened to them before, and they almost crashed. But when they turned to look what made them always crash, there was nobody. My dad's very superstitious. He is Russian. And he said that those are evil spirits and that you shouldn't talk about them because they feed off of that. I've had several, and I mean more than one, but less than 50 experiences. As a child, I was going to Catholic church, if that means anything. But with that in mind, I was raised thinking there were spirits, but not having seen or heard anything. Shortly after my grandpa died, I was staying at my grandma's house. I was in maybe the 5th grade when this happened. This was my first experience, and I never told anyone about it, because I was a kid and nobody would believe me. That night, I stayed at my grandma's house. I slept on the couch. I was too scared to sleep in her room. That's where my grandpa died. He died in his sleep. As a child, that would freak anyone out. But my grandma had this clock that would chime every hour. I remember being woken up to the chime. It felt like it wouldn't stop. I remember opening my eyes because I thought I heard my grandma walking down the hall to get water or something. Expecting to see my grandma, I was going to ask her when the chiming would end. But when I looked down the hall, I didn't see her. What I saw was, I can't describe it any better, a blue floating orb, and a massive one at that. It had to be the size of a head. It absolutely freaked me out, so I did what any child would do. Put my head under the blanket and closed my eyes so tight. I never brought it up to anyone, and that was definitely the last night at my grandma's house. Not long after that, maybe a month or so, at my old house. We've moved from that house about 7 years ago, and I have several experiences from there as well. I was in our basement with my younger sister. We were dancing to music with our childhood friend. I remember the song that I was dancing to when I saw this. It was Funhouse by Pink. It was the middle of the day during the summer, if that accounts for anything. But I remember I spun around and saw this extremely tall white figure that was standing in front of what was my room. I stopped dead in my tracks and just looked at it. It looked like lightning, electricity even. My sister and our friend noticed I wasn't dancing anymore and asked if I was okay. I said, "Don't you see it?" They of course said no. I didn't know what else to do, so I just sat on the floor and prayed for it to go away. And it did. I never saw that apparition again. I also remember one night I was reading on my Nintendo DS, lol, under the covers because it got cold in my room. And as I was finishing a chapter of some book I was reading on the internet, I felt a dip at my feet. Not thinking of anything since we've always had cats and dogs. Thinking it was one of our pets, I stuck my head out to pet them. And nothing was there, but the pressure of the dip was still at my feet. I once again pulled the blanket back over my head and prayed. The pressure didn't leave until after I finished my prayer. Thinking back, I believe it could have been my grandpa or one of my cousins who passed. But those are just my first few experiences. My experiences got creepier and creepier as I got older. Been thinking about some interesting experiences I had as a child with what I can only describe as shadow people. I have vivid memories of these tall, thin creatures with their vague features making their way into my bedroom late at night. Just before I fell asleep. Looming over my bed, I'd keep my eyes sealed, still able to sense them. Could feel their eyes staring at me, their breath on my face as they got closer. Every time one of these shadow people made their way into my room, I had what I described as a faraway dream. Even though I wasn't asleep, my 7-year-old self couldn't think of a better description. Anyway, during these dreams, I would watch as the room seemed to stretch, making things seem as if they were far away. I'd hear what seemed like hundreds of voices, first as whispers, but growing in volume and apparent agony until I couldn't hear anything else. As the otherworldly cacophony reached its peak, one of the shadow people would come into my room, walking in through the open door sometimes, but more often through either the closed attic trapdoor or straight through the second floor window. My eyes would stay sealed shut until I could no longer feel the being's presence or I fell asleep. I would tell my foster parents, later adoptive, what happened, but was just assured that it was just a simple nightmare. I just kept experiencing them for about another 3 years, with less and less frequency. I only ever saw the shadow people at this house, and my first encounter was within a few days of being moved here. But I'd had faraway dreams for about a year before this. I visited the house while I was in my first foster house, because 2 of my siblings were being fostered here separately from me, and we'd ride with my parents to pick them up during visitation days. Here's some backstory. My great-grandmother was a devil worshipper, abused all of her children for the sake of what she was doing. She was evil, to say the least. She murdered her lover because he said he was leaving her and then killed herself in front of her children. Again, she was evil. Please stay with me as this story gets crazy. I'm adopted. I, now 22 male, was adopted at 18 months old. I had severe night terrors growing up because I would have terrible nightmares. I was always afraid of the dark because I felt like something was in it, ready to snatch me up. Night terrors would turn into sleepwalking. Sleepwalking turned into sleep paralysis as I got older, and because of that, I now have bad insomnia. I have panic attacks that keep me up all night because I dread going to sleep. When I was about 16 years old, I had a series of dreams for about a week. I've always been on the fence on whether there's a God or not, but in these dreams, I would see angels. They were beautiful, and they would speak to me and tell me everything would be all right. Then, at the end of every dream, I would feel a dark force enter my mind. I would wake up, but I wouldn't be able to move or say anything. I felt hands pinning me down. I could only move my eyes. Each night, that same thing would happen, lasting about a week. Every night that week, I would see a dark figure rise from the ground at my feet. It would just stare at me until the final night. The final night, it swiftly came next to my bedside. Its eyes pierced my soul. It stooped to my level, laughing, and said to me, "You will never become anything," laughed again, and left. As soon as it left, the forces holding me down released me, and I could move. Needless to say, that's when I stopped sleeping at night. Fast forward to 18. I decided to go to bed one night because the next day I had to catch a bus to Oklahoma. I live on the East Coast. For some insight, I'm a very lucid dreamer, and because of this, I know when I'm about to have a paranormal experience. I was asleep, and around 3 a.m., I started to feel something happening. It's like being submerged in warm water. My body kind of goes numb, and I hear a ringing noise. In my dream, I find myself walking down a hallway. At the end of this hallway, there was a cracked door. I open the door to see a room with no ceiling. The sky is a greyish-orange colour, and in the middle of the room, there's a chair. I look around and no one is there with me. The door behind me has disappeared. I sit in the chair. As soon as I do, I'm surrounded by people. People I've never seen. They don't seem to have the intention of hurting me, but they're just staring at me. After a few seconds, they all in unison say, "Disorganize." As soon as they say that word, their faces start to literally melt off their bodies. Blood and flesh fall to the floor and they all drop dead. I immediately wake up and see that same dark figure standing at the edge of my bed, laughing. I'm laying there crying. I try with all my might to yell out the word God. In the Bible, demons shudder at the very name. The figure at the end of my bed screams in agony and yells, "God is not here," then yells, and then finally leaves. I'm released, and I just sat there crying until the sun came up and I had to leave. My trip was to meet my biological mother after 18 years. Fast forward to me asking questions and her answering. That's when she tells me about my grandfather and great-grandmother. My grandfather had followed in his mom's footsteps for a time, but now has turned to God. Yet he will still call my mom late at night and says, "Baby, are you ready to learn about the powers you have?" To this day, my mom says no. When my grandfather is in a demonic mood, he gets these blues rings around the pupil of his eyes. It's trippy to say the least. About a year ago, I told my mom about all these experiences, and she basically said that it's all my great-grandmother's fault because my grandfather admitted that his mom, before she took her life, cursed our bloodline and said we will never find happiness, which explains why I always feel like I'm being followed and watched, why I have these dreams. But not all of us are given this gift. My grandfather has the gift of communicating with the unseen world. My mom does, as I do, and my younger sister does. It sucks because my grandfather, when asked about this, will deny it. Well, here we are today. I'm married with a 6-month-old. My wife and I are being tormented by this unseen thing. Just last night, I heard banging on the walls in my son's room. I checked the cam. Nothing. I lay back down. I hear some growling next to me. Nothing is there. I catch it peeking at me from out of around the corner. I see its movements in reflections, its whispers. My poor son, I'm sure he sees it because he'll start screaming randomly at night. My wife is scared shitless too. I feel its presence. I never sleep at night, and during the day when I do sleep, I still feel like it's watching me, like a predator stalks its prey. I want this cycle to end. I'm tired of feeling threatened. I saw it. I finally saw it. Or at least what I believe it is. I live in my mom's 3rd-story attic. Yes, I'm well aware that I, a married man with a child, shouldn't be living with his mom. But we once lived on our own and we had to move back in because I lost my job due to the pandemic. This is my childhood home, so I've always seen and heard things. Most of the time, menacing whisperings. Well, just the other morning before sunrise, I saw what I believed to be the demon bothering us. My bedroom layout is simple. You walk up the steps to the top, and to the left is a bathroom door, down a 6-foot hallway, and to the right is the bedroom. No walls divide the bathroom from the bedroom, other than a door, of course. It's an open layout. When you turn right to go into the bedroom, on the far wall is the bed. And on the wall that is shared with the hallway leading to the bathroom is one of those big bookshelves with a large stereo system sitting in it. I apologize, it's a weird setup and hard to explain. I grew up in this house and know every creak and squeak that the floor makes. Right by the stairs, it squeaks when you step on it, so I'll wake up when I hear that because that means someone has reached the top of my steps. Well, this will happen multiple times a night, and every time it happens, I wake up. But the other night I saw something. Someone. and it made me stop and stare in horror. A few nights ago, I was having a really hard time sleeping, and about 4:30, I woke up to the floorboards squeaking. I woke up, saw nothing, went back to sleep. Around 5 a.m, I heard it again. This time I sat up and looked around. But this time, something caught my eye. When I sat up, I saw this big cloaked figure walking past the door to the bathroom in the reflection of that large stereo on the other side of the bedroom. It's dark on my side, but we keep the bathroom light on because, quite frankly, we're afraid of the dark, and this created a perfect reflection in the stereo. I stared in horror, hoping, praying that I was just tired, or that it's just the ceiling fan or something other than what I knew it to be. I immediately woke my wife up and told her what I saw. She took my son and stayed the last few hours in the spare room on the second floor. I will never forget what I saw. It wasn't a flash. It was someone walking average speed across the light. I rescued a black cat, a Maine Coon Bombay mix, about 2 years ago. I named him Gomez, after Gomez Adams, of course, because he's super affectionate and very needy, as he was abused prior to me adopting him. Recently, he's been acting a bit odd. More than usual, I should say. Prior to this experience, he was occasionally seemed like he was chasing or playing with something else, but obviously, I saw nothing. He is a cat though, so they do weird things like having the zoomies at random times. But I have also occasionally felt a cat rubbing against my leg, and when I look down, Gomez is nowhere in sight. But I hadn't thought much of it due to mental health issues along with psychiatric medications. Moving forward, all these experiences seem to lead to another possible option. Gomez came with a paranormal buddy. So, a few nights ago, around 5 or 6 a.m, Gomez kept desperately trying to wake me up and would not leave me alone. I thought nothing of it, as he occasionally does this if he doesn't sleep well and requires extra cuddles at night. Then he finally left me alone after like 30 to 45 minutes. So whatever, no big deal. I went back to sleep. His food dispensed from his little robot feeder and he jumped down to eat. Not too long after, I felt paws crawl on my hip and lie down. This is where he normally sleeps. So again, no big deal. Well, I then heard Gomez crunching on his food, so I got confused and slightly woke up. I swear I saw another cat laying on me. It looked white with spots, so definitely not Gomez. Then Gomez jumped up, the weight lifted off my hip, and then he lay down on me. So long story short, I'm not sure if I was hallucinating. Night terrors, sleep paralysis, and bipolar. Still dreaming while half awake, or I have a ghost cat in my house. Gomez has been running around a lot more than normal and staring off in my room, occasionally seeming like he's following something with his gaze. With all of that being said, if I adopted Gomez and he came with a little ghost companion, I got 2 cats for the price of 1. And 1 only eats and requires vet insurance. So I'm going to mark it as a win. When I was a child, I was pretty sure my home was haunted, especially my bedroom, but I didn't want to scare anyone, so I didn't say anything. I moved out years ago, but recently my brother told me out of the blue that my childhood bedroom is definitely haunted. I asked him how he knew, and he said it just was. When I was 6 or 7, I saw a disembodied dead hand coming out of my closet. It freaked me out, but I brushed it off by telling myself that kids see things that aren't there sometimes, and decided to ignore it and not say anything. There would also be days when an abnormal amount of flies would suddenly appear in my room overnight. They'd stay in my room and disappear fairly quickly the same day. I also had a period in elementary school where I had terrible insomnia in that room. I wasn't scared, I just couldn't sleep. My parents finally decided to have me sleep in the guest bedroom, and I was fine. Eventually, I moved back into my bedroom and didn't have that problem anymore. I always avoided being alone in the house, especially at night, and thought I was just scared of being alone, but found out after I moved out that that wasn't the case. It's just the house that scares me. Anytime I was alone, I felt watched or like someone was directly behind me. On one of the few nights I agreed to house sit and didn't have anyone stay with me, I heard loud footsteps in the attic. My dad was constantly in the crawl space and attic doing home repairs, so I've ruled out some stranger secretly living in our home. There was also another time a few years ago that my brother and I were visiting and my dog started growling at the corner again. All of our animals interacted strangely and often with this corner. I jokingly said something about it being haunted, but immediately followed it up with, "Just kidding, it's not real." And the exact moment I said that, a heavy painting in the corner was picked up and thrown hard against the ground. The nail in the wall was fine. The wire it hung from was fine. The wall was fine and hadn't moved in any way. I quickly apologized and prompted to never taunt it again. I've lived in several haunted and non-haunted homes now, and all of the haunted ones have a very heavy, not in a bad way, just neutral energy, just like my childhood home. Anybody else experience anything like that? Thoughts? I don't know what I expect to get from this, but I do want to share my experience this past week. Last week, I failed to gain any restful sleep. On Monday, I arrived home late in the evening and ate a large meal within an hour or two of falling asleep. That night, I had nightmares revolving around demonic/spiritual activity, and eventually was startled awake around the witching hour. Tuesday night, the same thing happens, but not the same dream. I think nothing of it, as nightmares for me occur very seldom, but when they do, they typically revolve around demonic or spiritual activity, or my teeth falling out. So nothing out of the norm for me. Wednesday night, I'm able to eat dinner a few hours earlier before bed, but I still experience another nightmare. This time when I wake up, I continue laying in bed and calm myself back down. Just as I'm about to fall back asleep, I feel the pressure change in my bed. I remember the moment vividly because it scared the piss out of me, to say the least. I was sleeping on my side, and as I was about to fall back asleep, I felt the mattress move up and cup my back. As a mattress normally would if you were laying on your side. The movement of the mattress was as if someone or something was laying next to me and got off the mattress. I sleep alone on a queen mattress with a weighted blanket. I also don't have any pets. The only pressure significant enough to change the shape of the mattress would be me. Unaware of whether the dreams or the presence in my bed were influenced by my good or bad energy, I saged my place the following morning. It's now Saturday, and the dreams have ceased for the time being, and I haven't encountered that presence again. Throughout my life, I have always moved homes, schools, and suburbs, which has never been a problem. However, one particular house my mother and I moved into, I would regularly encounter a girl covered in blood. To elaborate, I'm now 18 and would have been 5 or 6 at the time we moved into the property. One afternoon, my mother and I were sitting in the lounge room watching kids' cartoons and eating popcorn. I had been seated for a while and really needed to go to the bathroom. As I walked from the lounge room to the bathroom, I noticed the linen cupboard had been left open, but only slightly. On approach to the cupboard, I remember feeling quite nervous, but confident to find out what was inside of the cupboard. To my surprise, there was nothing in the cupboard, but there was a space big enough from the floor to the next shelf, allowing me to fit quite comfortably in the cupboard. Being 5 and having the worst attention span, I decided to play with my truck in the linen cupboard. I'd been sitting in there and playing for what felt like forever with my truck, until a very petite, miserable-looking girl appeared across from me in the cupboard. I was ultimately quite confused and didn't know who the girl was, but had a sense of comfort and security when she was with me. After sitting and just staring at this girl, I quickly came to realize she was covered in blood from head to toe. We both looked up, and she began to cry and slowly tell me details about her father did some horrible things to her, which I prefer not to share, and ultimately ended up murdering her in the house. I would regularly try and clean her blood with tissues, towels, and other absorbent materials, but never had any luck. The interaction didn't last too long as my mother called me back to the lounge room, but after meeting her once, we spent numerous occasions in that cupboard comforting one another, and we became quite close friends. However, I am now wondering whether this spirit genuinely did want my help, or was trying to take advantage of me due to my age at the time. In the late fall of 2019, my mom decided to leave our narcissistic and emotionally abusive stepfather. She, my younger brother, and I packed our stuff up into a U-Haul and took it all to the new apartment we'd be living in. It was like a breath of fresh air getting out of that house and into a place away from that man. For the first couple months, everything was going normally. My mom would go to work, my brother would go to school, and I went to an alternative school that only required me to go 2 days a week. This meant that I got a lot of time home alone, something I'd eventually come to hate. It started off small. One day, I heard the front door open. It was about the time my mom and or brother got home, so I went downstairs to see who it was. The door was wide open and nobody was home. I checked the parking lot and my mom's car wasn't there. My brother was nowhere to be found either. I closed the door and went back upstairs after making sure nothing was missing. The most common occurrence when I was home alone were the footsteps. If I was upstairs, I'd hear someone walking around downstairs. If I was downstairs, I'd hear someone walking around upstairs in my room. It was almost a daily thing, so eventually I just stopped trying to investigate. Only once did the footsteps come into the same room as me. My bed was against a wall, and I was laying down facing that wall, just scrolling on my phone. It was around 10 to 4 in the afternoon, and I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was about the time my brother got home every day from school, so I thought nothing of it. The steps came into our room. We had to share one, and stopped right next to my bed. I rolled over to see what he wanted, but there was no one there. A few minutes after that, I heard my brother open and close the front door and start up the stairs. It couldn't have been him the first time. The worst it got was on this one night. Everyone in the house was sleeping, except for me. As I was laying in bed, my eyes were drawn to the far corner of my room, right next to my bedroom door. I don't really know a good way to describe it, other than saying it was too dark in that corner. Like there was just a black hole in the room. Every time I looked into that corner, I nearly had a panic attack. But I managed to pull my eyes away several times, only for them to be drawn back to the same spot. There were voices too. They were all whispering indistinctly, but they sounded angry and hateful. It was the most terrifying night of my life. I think the worst part is that nobody believed me. I got the classic response that it was just the house setting, or that it was just the pipes. I guess it doesn't matter anyways. Shortly after, my mom, brother and I left and moved into another house. Not for ghost-related reasons, lol. I haven't had another experience since. It all started summer of 2017. Me and my friend had moved into a 3-bedroom apartment. Everything seemed fine for the first month, until I started seeing shadows flicker out of the corner of my eye. It didn't bother me at first, until the night terrors started. This shadow thing would just be standing over me, tormenting me, morphing and twisting its body into horrific formations. After this, it escalated. It started showing itself in full body apparition to me and my friend. It would stand over my friend's bed till he couldn't stand it anymore. And my friend would come to my room and ask if he could stay in there. Now my friend is a former Marine. Nothing phases this man. One day, we were all chilling in the living room and we heard someone banging on the door yelling, "Where is Chester? Where is my son? I know he's here. I'll call the police." We answered the door and a very worn down and old looking woman with wild eyes was screaming that phrase over and over, until our other friends started yelling at her until she left. We then named it Chester. Chester would begin to move things, flicker the lights, and shake the room at the most inconvenient and terrifying times. Like the shower, the final straw for me was the clawing at my door. At night, it would scrape and scrape and scrape until I would scream and run towards the door, and nothing would be there until the last time, where it towered over me like a behemoth. If I hear a cat scratching at a door, I immediately get sent into a panic attack. And that's why I don't have one, lol. I would leave the apartment, but the torments for my friend wouldn't end. He had moved back in with his parents, and I was with my grandparents. We lived fairly close. He texted me and asked me to come over. I found him on his porch, wild-eyed and holding his gun, that I heard the strangest wails, all popping from different places in the neighborhood. He motioned me to come inside. I asked him what was that, and he looked at me and said, "So you can hear it too?" I was like, yeah, that's not something you just don't hear. It's really loud. And he said, "Then why aren't the neighbors reacting?" I went quiet. He then said, "He won't let me sleep, bro. He's always there, always screaming right as I fall asleep. Please stay here and watch over me till I fall asleep." I of course obliged. I had to listen to the wails till sunrise. It would then, in 2020, target my brother after he challenged Chester, mocked him and dismissed him. For months, my brother was barely getting sleep. And when he did, it was only night terrors, paranoid and too scared to be in his apartment at night. Then this year of 2021, it targeted my grandmother. I had moved out and she didn't understand what was going on with this thing towering over her. She called for me, but obviously I wasn't there. She's fine, and it hasn't bothered her since. I've gathered more information on Chester from my friend. As it turns out, more happened in the apartment than I know. Apparently, he had a full-blown conversation that lasted like 3 hours with Chester, which involved multiple hallucinations, including showing him a giant pile of money that he could pick up, touch, and feel, only to disappear in his hands, tormenting him with visions and laughter. There's a lot to go over. I guess I will go over how the events unfolded to me. It started a kind of strange. As a kid of at least 6 or 7 years old, my parents were looking for the broom in the house as it had gone missing. They were tearing the house apart trying to find this broom and eventually gave up. Weeks later, my mum was vacuuming in our computer room where we had a large shelf in the corner in a way that would not allow for things to pass around the sides. This shelf is also about £200. Behind the shelf was the missing broom. I, of course, was blamed, and it was a big ordeal. This was only the beginning of the strange occurrences. Soon after that, several things followed. Everything from knocks to brand new light bulbs going out. Some things worth mentioning are the TV remotes flying off the table. Not just falling, but flying at least 3 feet forward and then falling to the ground. At this time, other miscellaneous items were falling too. Plus a couple of my infant brother's toys would go off at random times during the night. Now, my dad grew up in a conservative Christian household, so he was very quick to dismiss the stuff he saw happening. But the more he experienced, the more he started to pay attention. One of the things I vividly remember is sitting in the living room and my play-school plastic table eating some apples. I heard my name being called clear as day in a whisper. I quickly ran to the back of the house where my mom was and told her what's happened. My mom is very religious, so we said a prayer. Soon after that incident, we moved houses out of central Texas due to my dad getting a new job. We didn't really think about those occurrences after that, until things started happening again. The first occurrence I can recall is the most chilling one. My dad got home late from work, and my brother was asleep in the living room. My dad was talking to my mom when he thought he heard someone talking in the living room. He walked in there and found my brother asleep talking to someone, like he was having a bad dream. My dad listened for a little bit and began to hear something else, a young girl's voice. He couldn't make out what she was saying, but my brother kept responding no to it. My dad quickly woke him up and asked him what he was dreaming about, and he replied with, "A girl. She was asking me to go with her." My brother slept in their bedroom that night. Several other small things happened later, such as things being moved or knocks, but a couple major things happened when I was about 11 or 12. My mother was up late one night while my dad was on a business trip. She slept with our 2 Dachshunds that were very calm. She was studying for her online college and she heard heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. She assumed it was me or my brother. My dog became alert and started growling at the door. Apparently, my mom had never heard a dog growl with such fear before. Her doorknob turned and the door opened, with no one on the other side. I remember being woken up to my mom crying, holding me and praying. One day, I witnessed my dog get hit by a car. As I was running back to the house to tell my mom what happened, she heard me screaming that Frida got hit by a car. As soon as she heard that, the brake to the house flipped and we had no power. I'll explain this occurrence at the end. One of the most recent things that happened in 2014, I was getting home from school. It was around dinner time and my mom was cooking a casserole. I was in the kitchen with her getting the table ready. I remember seeing her drop the casserole dish and it's hitting the ground and making no noise. I asked her, "Did you just drop the casserole?" She looked at me puzzled. She said, "Yeah, I dropped it about an hour ago. I had to remake it." The dish was on the stove and nothing was on the ground. I swear I saw that dish hit the ground. So this is what I experienced firsthand, so I wouldn't find out the whole picture until later in my life. My mom has always had issues with stress and anxiety. She started school in 2005 when all of this stuff happened. My dad saw this correlation and did some research. He found that this occurrence is called a poltergeist. He found that sometimes stress can affect people in a way that magnifies supernatural occurrences. I guess in a way, you could say Mum was some level of psychic ability. Even hearing this as a kid, I was skeptical. Ghosts are one thing, but psychics? I later found out that my mom's side of the family has experienced much worse than what I did. My grandpa grew up with 10 siblings in one small 2-story house. Most of them stayed in one room and would play there a lot. One day my grandpa was showing his dad a handstand while in his room. It was a bad place to do a handstand because there was a glass mirror right behind him. If he were to fall, he would land on the mirror. Sure enough, he fell, but the door to his room opened and stopped him from hitting the mirror. The scary part is that the door didn't open that way. The door opened through the threshold and stayed. My great-grandfather grabbed my grandpa and slammed the door back into place and yelled, "That damn door isn't supposed to open that way." There's a lot of things that occurred with that side of my family, but it would take a book to explain. To wrap it up, going back even further in my family lineage. My mom's great-great-great-grandmother was hung for being accused of witchcraft. My mother practiced witchcraft in her younger years, and me and my brother have had dreams predicting the future of numerous occasions as children along with my mom. One last thing. In 2017, I was with my wife at her mom's house. While watching TV, we saw a dark figure in the reflection. It started in my wife's mom's room and moved into the hallway. I told my mother-in-law, and she'd seen the figure in her dreams. She thinks it had something to do with the guy she was dating at the time, went to a psychic and told her about the situation. She told the psychic about what I saw, and without her knowing anything about me, said it ran in my family. I haven't experienced anything since 2017, and my mom is done with school and hasn't experienced anything for a long time. I bought a painting at a thrift store of a beautiful young angel a few months ago. I was immediately drawn to it, which isn't typical for me. I'm not into art or angels. I hung it up in my bedroom the same day I bought it. The next morning when I woke up, the living room lights were on. I thought that was strange, that I wouldn't have noticed I left them on when I went to bed, since I can see my living room from my bedroom and would notice if the lights were on. The next night, I made sure they were off when I went to bed. Sure enough, the next morning, they were on again. Same thing happened the next night. This time, I woke up around 3 a.m. and could see from my bed the living room lights were on again. After that third night, I never had an issue again. So I chalked it up to some type of electrical thing, and it being a coincidence with the painting. Although the lights never turned on automatically during the day, just while I was asleep. Then just the other day, I was in my bedroom putting laundry away and the painting started swinging. Like it was very, very noticeable. I just sort of stared at it, watching it, and then it just stopped. That's never happened before. Nothing could have hit it. There were no breezes or drafts. It was really, really swinging. Not sure what to think. I don't get a bad feeling from it. I should mention I live by myself. So no one could have turned on the lights on after I went to bed or moved the painting. Back in 2017, I frequently saw what I now know as shadow people for a couple of months. I already have some visual snow and palinopsia and all that good stuff, so originally I just thought it was my vision doing its little acid trip. I would usually see them out of the corner of my eye. They would be hazy black figures with no distinct body, but at the same time I could make out how they were. Imagine if somebody edited a blur effect on black mannequin. They were tall or short, lanky figures. One time I saw one that was so tall that I had to bend its head down because of the ceiling. I then started to see them in my dreams, except this time their body was clear. I would go after them and chase them, but they'd always get away. In real life, they never spooked me, which is odd because I get paranoid easily. But in my dreams moderators, I always felt really anxious and wanted to catch them. Eventually one day, I saw one curled up in a ball on the floor of my restroom. And that was the last memorable time I saw one in that house. I realised one day that a few months earlier I had been in that same position on my bathroom floor due to a mental breakdown. And that's when I decided to research them. I read that they appeared during bad times in your life, but I'm not really sure what to think of them. I've only seen them 2 or 3 times in my current house. Has anybody else had experiences with these things? So I moved into my new house right as the pandemic started. It was pretty alright. Nothing was really off to me, besides the initial offness of living in a new house. So now it's September, and it's about 11 p.m. I don't usually fall asleep early, and my parents knock out around 9. At the time I was calling some friends on Discord. All of a sudden, I hear this really loud crash in the room next to mine, my dad's office. I flinch and tell my friends about it, but before I could investigate, I hear my dad come out of the room. I assume he knocked something down while taking his meds. He's diabetic and needs insulin, so I brushed it off. It was still odd though, because he doesn't ever stay up late. At 1 a.m, I hop off the call because I'm tired. I walk out of my room to use the restroom, just for me to see a random basket laying on the floor in the middle of his office. I was familiar with the basket, because he usually kept cotton pads in it, but it was weird that my dad, who loves to keep stuff organised, left it on the floor. I go back to my room, and as I try to fall asleep, I suddenly see the light around me darken and the overwhelming feeling of somebody standing behind me. Because my back was to the rest of my room, I immediately turn around in panic. I don't see anything though, and eventually fall asleep. The next day, I ask my dad about him knocking down anything, and he looks at me really confused. Apparently, he had heard the crash by my parents' room, which is on the opposite side of the hallway, and went out to investigate it, hence why I heard him moving around. I asked him about the basket, and he said that he found it on the floor too, and was confused as well. Considering how small it was, it sounded like somebody grabbed it and flung it into the ground aggressively. There was no real explanation as to how it could have landed where it did, because it was usually on my dad's desk across the room. We blessed the house, but I still have small odd things go on in my house sometimes. I was at a youth event the other day at my church. My church is one building split into 2 sides. Don't ask me why, but that's how it is for some reason. It was night time, and I had to use the restroom, and the only ones available were the one on the other side. Cool, whatever, no big deal. Until I stepped in and I got an overwhelming feeling that something wasn't right. I tried shrugging it off, thinking I was just being paranoid, but it started getting more and more overwhelming the more I was there. I started getting concerned when I was in the restroom, and I started shaking a bit. As I was about to open the door to leave, I felt like there was a being on the other side. I opened the door, and nada. But I ran out. Then I went outside, tried forgetting about it. Then the youth pastor and the pastor's kid ran out of the church. Apparently, as they were closing up the church, the light started flickering, and something in the back of the church was knocked over. Considering my history with being able to sense things, I don't think it's a coincidence. This was early December 2020. My husband and I live in a duplex, and my sister and brother-in-law have the other side. I woke up early in the morning, maybe around 1 a.m, because my dog was moving around a lot. He seemed scared. He really doesn't like loud noises, especially after the big earthquake we had a couple years ago. We're in Alaska. And he was acting like he did when the earthquake happened. So then I started hearing weird noises. The closest thing I can describe it was an avalanche from far away, like a deep whoomph sound. We definitely don't live close enough to a mountain to hear an avalanche though. It went on for about 40 minutes, off and on. I tried to wake my husband up, but he's a heavy sleeper and didn't really fully wake up, and he said he didn't hear anything. It was creeping me out, so I went to the Facebook group for our area, which encompasses the whole road and all the neighbourhoods branching off it, probably a 15-mile radius. And someone actually posted asking about the noises. About 45 people had liked and commented on it, all saying it had woke them up too. Some people said it was actually shaking their house, like a vibration almost. Others just said it was loud and rumbling. No one had a specific answer, but it seemed like the people living off of one road in particular heard it the loudest and actually felt it, but that it wasn't an earthquake. There's no airport nearby, and this definitely didn't seem like an airplane. Some people asked if it could have been the military base in the city across the inlets from us, but that still seemed too far off. Plus, the base usually posts when they're running training, or someone who works there will usually bring it up. Anyway, no one had a specific answer to what it was. The road we live off is pretty long, and we live nearly 10 miles down it. My sister lives a mile away, and my parents are about 5 miles away. When I told my family about it the next morning, none of them had heard it. My brother-in-law, who lives next to us, even said he was awake during the time I heard it, and he said he didn't hear anything. I know it happened because other people did hear it, even if it was a small group compared to the amount of people living in the area. I just don't know how so many other people didn't hear it. It was just very odd. And people who have lived in the area for over a decade said they never heard anything like it. Still, honestly creeps me out when I think about it, but it hasn't happened since. My brother-in-law joked about aliens and the like, but really, who knows? I'm in the US Army, and I live in the Barracks. The building I live in is old, so there's the possibility that this is something else, but I'm not 100% sure. Two details that might matter or might not. One, I live on the 5th floor, on a corner of the building. Two, I don't have a roommate. About a year ago, I first got the feeling that I wasn't alone in my room. It was uncomfortable at first, but I did my best to ignore it. This feeling was amplified when I have my closet door open for any amount of time, and comes with the feeling that I'm being watched. Then came the tapping. The tapping happens sporadically, but almost always at night, never during the day. It usually sounds like it comes from my closet, or maybe the wall next to my closet door, where my mirror sits on the wall. The tapping has no rhythm to it. Sometimes it will be 3 or 4 taps. Sometimes it's 8 or 9. Sometimes it's a gentle tap, like someone tapping their finger on the door. Other times, it's as if someone is knocking on the door. It sounds almost muffled. It's loud enough that I can hear it clear as day, but it doesn't vibrate the whole door or wall like it would if I was to knock on the door or tap on the wall. Either way, this tapping and banging sounds like something is very clearly trying to get my attention. I've tried to record the banging, but audio and video recordings don't seem to capture what I hear. Right, so how do I start this? Well, I'm a non-believer in paranormal activity, but what's happened to me over the past 3 months has changed that. I live in a sleepy village in the UK, which had a dark past with murders and such. About a year ago, my next door neighbour died and his dead body was left to rot in a chair, since his family never visited. I was quite close to him, and when I found out, it hurt. After a few months, the house got cleaned out by the family, and the chair that he died in got put into the back garden. I can clearly see from my bedroom window. I was talking to one of the people who live the other side of the street to me, and they said they had seen a white figure sat in the chair. I thought nothing of it, since I didn't think ghosts or spirits existed. And this kept happening until the chair got taken away by the council. And yet still, even though the house was empty and no one had access, I still heard banging and what sounded like voices from inside the house as it connected to my room. And I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Skip a few weeks and some new people moved in and I started to get along with them. And earlier tonight, I was sat in my garden with their cat called Oliver. The two from the house came out and said they were going for a meal, and no one else was in the house, so I asked if I could keep an eye on the cat. I said yes, and they left. About 20 minutes later, I went to check on the cat, and it was fine. I sat with it for about 10 minutes, and I kept hearing banging from inside the house from the front room. I started to think about it, and how similar it was to what I was hearing when the house was empty. This then was backed up when I heard an extremely loud bang from outside the house, which my parents also heard. This has well and truly got to me at this point, since this has happened over a few months. So I just thought I would share my story. I had 2 crazy encounters when I was about 4 years old. I'm 24 now, and I still think about them all the time. The first encounter was when I was in bed trying to sleep. Suddenly, a human-like figure rose from the floor and stood there just looking at me from the end of my bed. It was short, like a child, and I got the feeling that he was a boy. I got scared and sort of was screaming for my mom. She came into my room to get me, and she took me to her room to sleep in between her and my dad, so that I would feel better. The same exact figure rose from the floor at the end of their bed too. I started screaming again, so my mom picked me up and started taking me back to my room. As she carried me down the hallway in her arms, I began seeing the figure following behind her. It was scaring me so much that I kept screaming and started thrashing around in her arms. She placed me back in my bed and left the hallway light on as a nightlight to calm me down. I didn't see the figure ever again after that. The second encounter that I had was not too far apart from the night of the first one. I got up in the middle of the night looking for a pack of cheese crackers. 4-year-old me's favourite snack, lol. I was in the kitchen climbing up on a chair to get to the crackers in the cabinet. And as I was turning to get back down, there was a short, alien-like creature standing in the corner watching me. It had huge eyes and a cape draped around him with a tall collar. I was frozen with fear for a few seconds. I didn't know what to do next because I was standing where the kitchen was. I jumped down and just darted past it. I actually moved aside for me, like it was just giving me room to run past. I continued running back to my room and stayed there. I haven't seen her since. This happened yesterday, 1st of December, during a video call with a colleague. I'm based in London. My colleague is based in Toronto. The call began It's 6 p.m. London, 1 p.m. Toronto time. I helped raise finance for technology companies, and we talked about how to finance a series of startups within the areas of AI, 3D printing, IoT, Internet of Things, and space tech. All went well until 32 minutes into the conversation, when I suddenly felt a drop in temperature. Knowing that my heating has been on the blink for a few days, I chalked it up to that, excused myself, and put on a jumper. Back to the conversation. 5 minutes in, my colleague stops and leans into her camera. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Who is that behind you?" she asked, her face showing signs of worry. I swing around. No one there. I thought she was joking. She knows I live alone and on the 3rd floor of a pretty new complex. I told her that her tactics to scare me aren't going to work. I don't mess with the paranormal due to issues in my past, and I don't play around with Ouija boards, etc. And the apartment is new and not built on a burial ground, etc. She looks at me worried and explains that she is deadly serious. 5 minutes after I returned with the extra layer of clothing, I was holding forth on the cash flow forecast of a company. She noticed movement behind me. It came into focus and saw a woman, young in her 20s, average build, Caucasian, stood directly behind me, staring intently at me. I asked for more details. My colleague said, I've never seen anyone stare with so much hatred as anyone before. Not in real life, but in the movies." I initially laughed it off, but my colleague was disturbed enough to cut the call short and send me the company details by email. I wandered around my apartment checking. Even talked to my landlord who brought the apartment when complex, when it was brand new. He said that as far as he can tell, no one of that description has ever lived in my apartment or in the complex. I'm going to do a bit more investigation into the building, the surrounding area, and even into people I have known, but at this point, I'm at a loss to explain why this could have happened. Should I be worried? To set the scene, my family are of Hindu-Indian background that settled in the UK in the 1960s. Apart from my parents, everyone else was born in the UK. Two things of note are A, my grand-uncle was a Hindu exorcist. B, the Hindu religion, or Santana Dharma to give it its correct name, has an extensive belief structure based around the dark side, demons, monsters, witchcraft, etc., that is also affected by the local environments and folklore. As a family, we moved to a new house that was previously owned by an elderly lady. The lady was found dead in the home, downstairs, where apparently she was sleeping. The only furniture that we kept was a beautiful wardrobe that had a long mirror on its door. It was situated in the master bedroom. Within 2 years, my father died. Apparently, a heart attack. He did have underlying illnesses. Then, within 6 months, weird things began to happen after my first nephew was born. My mother said she saw my father looking over his first grandchild early one morning. After that, she began to hear voices coming from the master bedroom, calling her name at odd times when no one else was in the house. The family put it down to stress and grief. No more occurrences until my second nephew was born. His birth seemed to trigger a cascade of events. Initially, it was voices that would moan in agony, coming again from the wardrobe area of the bedroom. Then shades, or shadow people, crossing the top of the stairs. My mother and sister-in-law were scared to tears when they heard screams and footsteps pounding all around them, yet no one else was in the house. Then the attention centered on my youngest nephew. He was 2 when it began. He would sit for hours talking to various presences in various rooms in full front view of the whole family. One evening, everyone was in the living room just talking. The 2 boys were playing with their respective toys when suddenly the youngest stopped and shouted loudly, "No, no, no, no! Stay away, stay away, stay away!" My brother had to hold him tight to stop him from having a fit. From then on, one adult would always be with him. Finally, one night my sister-in-law woke to hear her name being called. She looked to the wardrobe and found people on the other side, looking into the room. Most of them were of Indian heritage. She thought she was dreaming, went back to sleep, but awoke an hour later. Again, the people were still there, but this time, she saw one pushing its way through the mirror into the bedroom. This is when her screams woke everyone. Cue the whole house lit up and the family staying at a cousin's place that night. Next day, we brought in a Hindu priest who went around. He came back down looking very unsettled. He told us that the old woman who owned the house was living downstairs because of the mirror. The mirror was the focal point of all the issues. It was acting like a portal, and our family history of dealing with the occult, my granduncle, had attracted all the individuals in our family who had died and not reincarnated due to attachment to this material world. They were angry and hungry. They were looking for peace, so they decided to use this portal to attract the attention of the family to do the final rituals for them, hence all the activity and attacks, etc. We asked what would happen if we just got rid of the wardrobe. His answer, now 30 years old, scares me to this day. It won't matter. They have gained a foothold in our world. The door has been opened. If you don't do the rituals in India, they will possess the youngest, and then each one of you in turn. You will all die, but not before you suffer mightily. My brother, sister-in-law, mother, and youngest nephew, the most affected, went to a special place in India and did the rituals over a day. The moment the final mantra was spoken, myself and my eldest nephew heard the door of the wardrobe shut forcefully. Then, under the instructions of the priest, we took the wardrobe apart, taking care not to break the mirror, and then disposed of it. Today, 30 years later, my youngest nephew is 32 and hates all things spooky. My sister-in-law only uses small vanity mirrors, and I sometimes get sudden chills that alert me to never look into any mirrored surfaces within the location I'm in. I did once, and scared myself so badly, I didn't leave my house for a week. It seems that the occult sensitivity that made my granduncle an exorcist jumps one generation, and now it's myself and 2 cousins who display, to varying degrees, sensitivity to the occult. I appreciate your reading in patience so far. I've collected more anecdotes of the South Asian occult experience in the West and India. Maybe I can relate some more here. In the meantime, please be incredibly careful what furniture you keep or old furniture you buy, and if you can, do buy brand new mirrors. This is from my college days. I did my postgraduate in the city I now call my home, London. In my final year, I was dating a doctor, A, who introduced me to her group of lifesavers, doctors and nurses. While the majority view of doctors is that they are modern-day saints, once you spend any amount of time with them, you realise that they have the same hang-ups, fixations and screws-up as the rest of us have. The only difference is that they have access to some amazing and dangerous pharmaceuticals. One of the group James Christian, was your typical third-generation medical professional. He came from a family of physicians, grandparents, parents, uncles, aunts, etc., and he knew it. Most of the time, he was behaved around with us civilians, but he did suffer from a messiah complex, and the arrogance would come out at the most inopportune times. Most of the times he would get away with it, but sometimes the rest of us would step in and push him out the door before a severe beating was delivered by the civilians. Now, to the event that led me to this post. Saturday evening, London, in the area known as Leicester Square. This is where the majority of London's showcase cinemas and theatres are located. Great eateries, pubs and comedy clubs. The square has a lot of street performers. On any given day, you can see acrobats, people imitating statues and singers, and so on. Having just finished a meal, our usual group were walking across the square to a pub we usually finish the evening off in. James, as usual, was talking about some miraculous surgery he had performed that afternoon and how he was on the fast track to being a legend. So involved was he with his monologue that he wasn't watching where he was going and slammed straight into a street performer. Before we could help the man up, James began to shout at him, "Watch where you're going, you idiot!" The man slowly stood up, brushing myself and A off. He was in an evening suit, top hat and tails. Just your everyday normal weirdness. But what really freaked everyone was his gaze. He had these intense staring eyes. He looked at us all, one by one, slowly. Finally, his gaze rested on James. "What the hell are you looking at, freak?" The man didn't say a word, but his body language spoke volumes. "I asked you what the hell you're looking at, you freak." The man just stood there, saying nothing, his full attention on James. James, used to having his way, became a bit flustered. You're nothing but a street performer, pal. I save lives. I'm a doctor. What are you?" Again, the man just stood there, still, just staring. The rest of us had now become unnerved. This wasn't going to end well. A pulled at James. "Come, let it be. Let's get a few drinks." James allowed himself to be led away. The man just stood there, just staring. But as we were just reaching the limits of the square, he called out, "If you are a doctor, which hospital do you work at?" James couldn't resist. "The best one in London, Chelsea and Westminster." With that, we hit the bar. Many drinks later, we bid farewell to James and the others. And that was the last anyone ever heard of Dr. James Christian. A search was carried out, an investigation. Nothing. His apartment was clean, his passport was gone, and his bank account was empty. Popular consensus was that he had decided to take his legendary skills elsewhere. The case was still left open. Fast forward 2 years, and one of the London papers received the following poem. From yours truly. Darkness. I awoke. I looked outside, and there it was. Gaslight and mist. A brilliant combination. To commit, the perfect mutilation. I sat up and slipped on my breeches. I cut my face and gazed at my watches. Midnight was near, but my mind was far from clear. So I took a pill and thought about the drill, the one I used on Dr. Christian when he asked the wrong question. "Are you mad?" he squealed as he struggled in vain. "Of course not," said I, as I pierced his brain. There was a fountain of blood. He screamed and screamed. I got tired of his voice, so I ripped out his spleen. But enough of these thoughts, for the hour is here. A woman must be caught. I must see her fear. My instrument of torture is a knife from my butcher. It's dirty and worn and it's cut through tendon and bone. I put on my cloak and then my hat. I open my door and skin a cat. I walk in shadow, I stalk the night. I hear a horse laugh. Heh, heh, heh. I will dine tonight. They say I am dead, that I never existed. But in this, the killing season, they soon will have reason to remember you're truly Jack. The police made the usual inquiries, but concluded that this was a hoax. Someone who knew about the disappearance of James and had a major fixation on Jack the Ripper. So I'm not too sure. I sometimes still go to Leicester Square, still visit the cinemas and theatres, but I make sure that I look where I'm walking and I never, ever disrespect any street performer, especially one who's dressed in a top hat and tails, and who has a stare that gives truth to the phrase, if looks could kill. COVID-19 has killed too many people this year, but my friend's father was not one of them. He died from a heart attack. The funeral rites of Hinduism are long, to make sure the soul's attachments to this material plane are completely removed. Part of this is to make sure that any chance of the soul being left in limbo to haunt the living is minimized. My friend, distraught and in grief, collapsed at the funeral. Her relationship with her father was one of those loving father-daughter relationships, immortalized in Hallmark cards, memes, etc. Fast forward 4 months to a few weeks ago. I was on a video call with her, explaining a paranormal incident that happened to me during a Zoom call. And out of the blue, she said she wanted to do a Ouija board session to contact her father. I said that this was a very, very bad idea. I sent her links to the many stories about how Ouija boards are a portal to trickster entities and all the bad stuff that will result. She, in an emotional state, began to berate me for not supporting her in her time of need. After a few harsh words on both sides, she shut the call down. I heard nothing until the 27th of December. Her brother called. I asked how she is. He explained that she did a Ouija board session over 4 days with 2 of her girlfriends. The 2 others didn't report any activity or harm, but his sister was in a bad way. First, it was nightmares of their father appearing and turning into something else. Then she started waking up in the middle of the night to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed. Finally, during the daytime, a figure began to appear in odd reflective surfaces. The family reached out to a priest who was knowledgeable in these matters, and it seems that things are slowly getting under control. I told the brother that I'm happy that this is the case. His final comment was, "Would you take the board and get rid of it for us?" I said no. Best to give it to the priest. He would be able to handle it. I clicked the video call off without saying goodbye. Reason? He said that last sentence with a smile, which put me on edge. I think that all is not right in my friend's household, but I'm too scared to pry further. So let me start off and say, my husband and I are total stoners. So maybe that's the explanation for this. But I really think it was something supernatural. So I used to bartend and get home after midnight, and my husband now, boyfriend then, would stay up late, get high, and chill out and watch TV. So one night after work, we're doing our thing when it sounds like right outside our window, a car crash happens, preceded by screaming and general carrying on. We look outside and don't see anything at all, but figure maybe it's just out of view. Then, off and on, we kept hearing female and male screams, to the point where I'm like, do we need to call the cops? Like, it sounded terrifying, and sounded like it was happening right outside our window, but still, we couldn't see anything. I'm pretty shaken up, and I keep hearing it, but seriously, nothing. Eventually, it all calms down, and then we start getting a knock at the front door in the window, but no one there. At this point, I'm like, what the fuck? But I'm really thinking something not normal and natural is going on, but I don't want to indulge it. I get up to make some tea to calm us down when I hear a female's voice clear as day, as if it's in the same room, say, hello? I look out the kitchen to my husband and I'm like, did you hear that? He says yes, and all that I could do was walk around the room saying, what the fuck is going on? Like I was seriously tripping out. The next day, I asked my husband what was going on and he's like, I think it was some cats on the porch. Lol. My husband is a total skeptic, but every now and then I'll bring it up, and one time he did admit that it was something strange, and he did hear it, but most times he just wants to act like it was nothing. Ever since I can remember, I felt something with me. Ghost or not, it doesn't scare me, but it likes to play jokes. One of the instances that stands out was about 10 years ago. I was still living with my parents at the time, and I decided to cook dinner. I love to cook, so it was never a chore, but I hate peeling potatoes. My dad has never minded peeling them for me, so we went to the kitchen together to prepare the dinner. Our kitchen bar was L-shaped, and the little part of the L was always clear except when we were preparing food. My dad and I started getting everything out of the cabinets that we would need. He then asked me if I had seen any of the potato peelers. I told him no, but I'd help him look. My mother is just like me in the fact that everything has a place, so I thought this task would be simple. Both my father and I looked in the drawer where they usually are, then the dishwasher, then the dish strainer. We were beginning to get frustrated. We started looking in cabinets and other places that we knew they weren't supposed to be, but it was worth a shot. While my dad was at the other end of the kitchen, I bent down to look in the cabinets under the small part of the L, and my dad called my name. I stood up and looked at him with my back toward the bar. He had a blank stare on his face and was just pointing. I turned to see what he was pointing at, and on the edge of the bar, 2 of the potato peelers were neatly placed side by side. A more recent event happened a couple of weeks ago. A little bit of a side note. My husband absolutely hates to misplace or lose things. One morning we had gotten up, made our bed, and went to the kitchen for breakfast. On top of our freshly made bed, my husband placed his wallet to come back for later. After breakfast, he said he needed to go to the store and proceeded to our bedroom while I stayed in the kitchen cleaning up. All of a sudden I heard, "You've got to be kidding me." I smiled because I knew what had happened. He came back to the kitchen and asked if any of our children had been in the bedroom. I replied that they had gotten out of bed and been in the kitchen the entire time. After 10 years of being with me, the last thing he thinks of is my friend, as he calls it, hiding things. I told him I'd go help him look, so we headed back to the room to look. We looked under the bed, on our dressers, in the bathroom, and then slowly took off every layer of the bed. At the end of the search, still no wallet, and the cover and sheets lay in a big pile at the end of the bed. Being the OCD man he is and hating that something of his had disappeared, he tried to convince me and himself that maybe he sat it in the living room or kitchen. To humour him, I followed him through the house, searching room by room. Even the rooms we both know he didn't go in. By this time he was angry. I told him it would turn up and that I was going to make the bed again. As soon as I stepped in the door, I called for him to come. Lying on top of the mound of covers lay his wallet. He doesn't like my friend. When I was 22 years old, I was pregnant with my oldest child. My child's father, we'll call him Rob, had used illicit drugs in the past before we got together. Our bedroom was set up with our dresser placed against the wall opposite from our bed. One night, I awoke to the sound of scratching. I looked to the foot of the bed and saw the outline of Rob's body sitting there facing the dresser. He was leaning forward a bit, as if he were hovering over something on top of the dresser. I thought he was cutting up drugs, even though he had never done so during the 4 years we'd been together. Extremely confused, I whispered, "Rob, what are you doing?" He didn't acknowledge that he had heard me, so with a little more volume in my voice, I repeated his name. Again, no response. He just continued scratching at the dresser. Irritated, I threw the blanket off of myself, huffed loudly, and began to scoot down to the edge of the bed. But I stopped abruptly and froze. Before I had the chance to make any significant movement, I heard a sudden snort. You know the sound that people make when they snore and you interrupt their sleep, but they don't fully wake up. I slowly looked to my left and realized that Rob had been sleeping soundly next to me the entire time. So the summer before I started 6th grade, I had just moved into this new house and I was just done taking a shower. When I had walked out, I saw someone standing in the doorway of my brother's room. I thought it was my brother, since it looks like him. He said, "Hello there," in this creepy voice, and I just responded with a confused hi and left. I turned around to see if he was still there, and the bathroom door had shut. I went downstairs, talked to my mom a bit, then I threw my clothes in the laundry when I got down to the basement. Guess who was there? My brother and my stepdad. Both of them in the freezer looking for hot dogs. My brother had been downstairs the entire time and hadn't once gone upstairs. I just looked at them confused and shrugged it off, but I couldn't explain it. A few nights afterwards, I was laying in bed around my bedtime and it was dark outside. I looked out my doorway to see a man in a hat and suit staring at me before turning around and going to my parents' room. I froze and felt extremely afraid. I eventually fell asleep though. For a little while, my mother said I would scream "shut up" and "get out" in my sleep, and she felt it was strange. I had no memories of it, or being distressed over a dream. Well, around that, I've never been afraid of the dark or felt uneasy about it. I've never been afraid of anything being under my bed or in my closet. I started to feel tense walking around the house when it was dark. Not always, but sometimes. Something in the body would tell me to run. I also felt cold breaths on me while I laid in bed or something grabbing me when I started to fall asleep. I would feel nervous laying up against my bed at night on the floor. And I would always constantly wake up every night at exactly 3:05 a.m. or 2:58 a.m., no other times. I started to close my closet door because I started to feel afraid, or like I was being watched when it was open. Fast forward a few years, and I just have the uneasiness, and my mom has cleansed the house with sage weekly. Well, we lost the sage. Every time we got sage, it would come up missing immediately. We could have just lost it, but still, we have no idea where most of it was. I started to have really bad sleep paralysis of the same skinny, ghostly women entering my room through my closet, or from the bathroom. My mom cleansed my room again, and the most I've had recently was an uneasiness and nightmares of being killed by an entity. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not really afraid anymore, but it's still a strange occurrence. There was a period in my life where I would always wake up in the middle of the night. The TV was on eco mode, so it always shut off after inactivity. So the room would be pitch black when I woke up. Then, every time I woke up, I kept seeing this grey shadow standing in the middle of my room, facing me. It had no face and was maybe 1 meter 40 centimeters tall. Not very tall. It had the shape of a human. I remember every time this happened. I tried closing my eyes while I kept my cool, trying to turn the TV on. And as soon as the TV came on, it would disappear because of the light. This happened very frequently, so I got used to it and thought it was just something weird with my vision. But one night I woke up with the same shit happening, and I got fed up and decided to aggressively stand up and lean towards it while saying, "What the fuck are you?" to see what the fuck it was. Maybe scare it and make it disappear. What shocked me was it didn't disappear at all. It was still standing there, clear as day, facing me. I just ran the fuck up to turn the lights on, and it would disappear. And I would just sit in my room with the lights on for a bit, trying to make sense of what just happened. Strangest experience I've ever had with something paranormal. The shadow never appeared like this after this incident. In the corner of my room, I've got my TV and a sofa chair with my computer. And I've experienced 3 times when sitting and chilling on my computer with my TV off. I've seen in my TV a shadow walking past me, behind me. I grew up in rural North Carolina. I lived up in the woods where there used to be a water mill. A family lived there back in the 40s. The parents had 2 daughters and 1 son. Unfortunately, one of the daughters got caught under the water wheel and drowned. Ever since I've been a kid, I always heard humming and low singing in the woods when I was out tromping them. But the one thing that really scared me one night was when I was older. I worked for the sheriff's office, and I had left work early one night due to being over a lot of hours. So I got home around 2:30ish. And when I pulled up, I saw the figure of a little girl standing right beside my garage. And when I got out of my car, she was gone. The next experience I had was when I was out hunting in the same woods. It was super quiet, a beautiful fall evening. I had just got down into my stand when all of a sudden I started hearing the same humming and singing I heard multiple times over the years. But I heard what sounded like someone walking towards me. I looked everywhere and couldn't see anything. And I heard a laugh, but not the same laugh as before. So as I was climbing down my tree stand, a rock hit my boot. And once again, I heard the laughing. Now mind you, the area I was hunting was about 3 miles deep in the woods, where there was no one around. So I brought my brother and cousin and a few friends down there one night, and we were just going to sit and listen and see if we could hear anything, or whatever. We were down there playing cards, joking about it, when all of us heard what sounded like someone that was in the distress. We all went quiet and listened, and we could hear what sounded like someone breathing heavily. And the thing that confused me about that night was that if it was a little girl or something more dark, sometimes I think things are better left alone. I can't say that I've never seen a ghost, but 2 experiences tell me I might have been near one. The first one, I was recruiting duty in New Jersey, Army. My wife and I lived on Fort Dix. FYI, it was the early 2000s, and while Fort Dix is not an active duty post anymore, the housing area and facilities are still used for personnel that have to work in the area. Or were. I have no idea of their status now. The thing is, the housing area was supposed to be torn down and new houses built. They had actually torn down a section and were going to build new houses. Then, me and other service members would move from our homes to the new ones, and the houses we left would be torn down and replaced. That didn't happen, because this was shortly after 9/11. All of those houses were the same, as you'd expect on a military post. Same layout, same basic stuff. We lived right next to a guy I worked with. Hell, 2 other guys I worked with lived on the same streets. We all got along, but as you can imagine, even though I liked these guys, seeing them 12 plus hours at work and then after work and on days off got old, fast. Then there was a hurricane that passed through. Fort Dix is relatively close to the coast, so there was a lot of rain. And since the army has taken money out of maintaining the housing areas so they could build a fence around the entire post, the roof of our house collapsed. I'll spare you the details. Basically, we had to move. The government was at fault, blah, blah, blah. There were 2 houses that were available at the time. Yeah, I could have taken the option to move off post, but recruiting duty was brutal. I was at work all of the time, and my wife was already pissed about that. I was never home, and I only had Sundays off, and sometimes not even that. Plus, I knew it would end, so I'm not looking for a lease off post, when all I wanted was to get out of a recruiting in New Jersey anyway. One house that was available was right next to another guy I worked with. No prob, I liked the guy. He was cool, and he wanted out of recruiting duty when his time was up too. The other was a block away. We looked at that one first. An older lady that worked with my wife had told her that she actually lived in that house on post before her husband passed. She had told her that even when they lived there, the house was creepy and had a bad spirit in it. Me? Whatever. Each house was the same. I felt that until we inspected it. My wife isn't someone that gives in to superstition easily, but as soon as we entered the place, it felt off. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like nothing was level. Everything in our perception was off, like a funhouse. Plus, I seriously had feelings of anger and rage with no provocation when we were in the place. I remember that because it was out of the blue. I was cool when we walked up to the place, but once inside, I instantly hated everyone, and I felt like I was 2 seconds from going berserk. My wife also felt uncomfortable in the place. It made her feel angry for no reason. We both decided nope. We opted to move into the second choice. It was next door to the other guy I said I worked with, but what the fuck? Liked this guy, and his, at the time, toddler daughter was a sweet kid, so no harm. We never found out why that house made us feel that way, but my wife will not deny that it wasn't us. There was something there, and she is not the person who will believe in ghosts and goblins easily. The lady she worked with wouldn't give details either, and she clearly didn't want to talk about it beyond what she had told my wife. I still wonder, what was it? It was nearing Halloween, and they had an old town Alexandria ghost tour. My wife had to work, but she told me to go on the tour if I wanted to, by myself. It was going to be cold that night, but my wife had given me a warm overcoat that came down just behind my knees. Sort of important for later. It went just like you'd expect. The tour guide lady in old-timey clothes led the group around, maybe a dozen or so people, to different places in the city and told us stories about X died here in a duel, and people hear or see his ghost at times. You know, that kind of thing. The tour ended at some church that George Washington prayed at or something. I can't remember which church. It was over 20 years ago, but I looked up historic churches before typing this, so it may have been Christ's Church in Alexandria. Don't hold me to that though. Anyway, the church was obviously closed, but the grounds weren't. We stopped on that side of the church by a door as the tour guide lady told us some spooky story. She was in front of the door. We all stood on a brick walkway as she spoke, facing her. There was maybe about 10 feet of space from the church to a brick wall, and there were a few grave markers in the grassy area before the brick wall. There was no one to my left. As the lady spoke, I heard a heavy sigh directly behind me. I turned. No one was behind me. Just a few grave markers and a wall. I looked to my right, and there was a guy on the tour, listening intently to the tour lady. I figured it was my imagination, but then a few seconds later I heard it again, and it seemed even louder, like someone was doing it on purpose to get me to look. Again, I looked behind me. Again, nothing. I looked at the guy to my right and asked, "Did you hear that?" He looked at me a bit annoyed and said, "Hear what?" I was certain I heard a heavy sigh. This guy was the only person close enough to me to have heard it, and he said he didn't. I know he wasn't the source of the sound. Then the lady finished her story and told us we were free to explore the cemetery behind the church. The crowd dispersed into it. I was wandering by myself when I saw two women by a tombstone. It was one of those tabletop kinds. I don't know if they have a special name or anything. This tombstone was about 10 feet from the wall of the cemetery. People had been putting pieces of Halloween candy on it. So I walked over and asked the women why people put candy on this particular grave. They said they didn't know and walked off before I could ask whose grave it was. But I was curious, so I took out my lighter and tried to read the name on the stone. I figured I could look it up later. I couldn't make out the name, as the stone was really worn and my lighter didn't give me a lot of light. Then I heard it. A heavy sigh, followed by breathing, as if someone was trying to catch their breath after exerting themselves. I spun around. No one. No one was even remotely close to me. No one was within at least 30 feet of me. I said out loud, "Okay, who is doing that?" Even as I spoke, I kept thinking, this has got to be my imagination. Another heavy sigh and breathing. This time I know I heard it, right behind me, and of course, no one was even close by. And that's when all of my army training boiled down to the 2-mile PT run. I took off. I bolted. No thoughts required. I booked on out of there at top speed, and I kept on running until I got a few blocks away to my car and went home. I was unnerved even when I got home. My wife and a friend were watching TV at the time, and I told them what happened. They both laughed, and maybe only believed that I heard something that sounded like what I thought it was. I said, "Fine, let's all go and I'll show you the place." They made no secret that they were in the nope because you may be right category and chickened out of it. Where does my long overcoat come in? The friend asked, "Did you really run all the way back to the car non-stop?" I told her, "You see how long this coat is? I was going so fast it looked like a cape and people thought I must be Batman." Okay, not the greatest joke in the world, but it made my wife and friend laugh. I never did go back to that cemetery. Kinda wish I had. I still want to know why the candy and whose grave it was. So I have a friend from my city I used to live in Kentucky. Me and my 2 sisters and parents moved to Reno, Nevada, where we now live. My friend was visiting her dad in Reno, so she stopped by our house for a sleepover because she wanted to have a sleepover, I guess. I don't know, she kind of just showed up. Anyway, she loves paranormal stuff, and she wanted to summon a ghost for some reason. I'm a dumb kid, so I played along, and we made a house-made Ouija board. We started asking it the usual questions, blah blah blah, and what we got was a little 7-year-old girl who was murdered by her dad with an axe, because her dad drank a lot of beer, she said, and she gave the date in which she thinks she was born, and when she thinks she died. She also gave us her name, so I went up to the computer and looked up the police records for murders, and there was someone who was axe murdered by her father and was 9, not 7. All the other dates, names, birth dates, etc. were exactly the same. So either the ghost said the death date's wrong, or it's not the same person. Anyway, now we summoned this ghost, and she didn't leave, by the way. I hear small footsteps in the hallway beside my bedroom for a time every day. And whenever we eat a meal, I'll hear a very faint, "I'm so hungry," from the hallway. She's not a creepy ghost, though. She doesn't say much, but whenever she wants to go in one of our rooms, she will knock. Like I'll hear a tapping on the door, and all I do in there is play video games, so I'll just say, "Come in." And I'll hear faint footsteps on my carpet, and then hear faint footsteps out of the room. Other than that, she doesn't do anything. She just likes to hang out in the hallway, I guess. So I had a best friend around the time of my early 20s. My friend and her mother moved into an apartment in a nearby town. Around 1 or 2 months after their move-in, I was walking in the kitchen heading for the door. Out of my peripheral vision, I saw a figure of sorts, small and low to the ground, quickly pass by me. My first reaction was of it being their pet dog, a small dog, so out loud I called its name. I turned around to the direction I thought it had in, and the dog was nowhere to be heard or seen. I believe I turned around way too quickly for the dog to have run out of sight. I'm not sure if that relates to what comes next, but it's of note. About a month later, month 3 post-move-in, my friend started telling me she would hear or see shadows in her apartment. I thought maybe my ghost dog story got her imagination going, but I did believe her as she was never one to talk about paranormal stuff. She was a bit freaked out. Shortly after, my friend started telling me her experiences. I was over their apartment and sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for my friend to be done with her shower. Her mother was home and sat down across the table from me. Her and I got along and all, but never really sat down to chat kind of relationship. So it caught me a little off guard that she sat to talk with me. She starts by saying she wants to tell me something in confidence, as her daughter's good friend. Okay. She begins by telling me how my friend was also telling her mom about these experiences she'd have. Her mom admitted she pretty much brushed it off as being nothing, but noticed it was bothering her daughter. Then she went to the post office and went inside for service. Just like the movies, the small town clerk says something like, "Oh, you just moved here? Did you hear what happened where you lived?" That kind of movie line. Really? Apparently, a middle-aged male was arrested for child molestation charges. On the court date for his arraignment, he shot and killed himself at the house. The mom was now beside herself and afraid to tell her daughter. Not even a month later, they had packed up and moved out. I'll never forget it. I was about 12 years old, doing my school homework on my family's dining room table. This was my usual homework spot, a big wooden dining table set up, a couple windows, chandelier above, and a few pieces of art on the walls. One of which was a framed painting, hung on the wall by your usual nail and hanger. It was a painting of a young girl in a field of flowers. Didn't we all have one? Directly below this wall art, placed against the wall, we had a wooden side table where my mom displayed her nice glassware on the top of. At this time, both my parents were downstairs, but in separate rooms. Just myself sitting at the dining room table doing my homework. Scene set. As I always have, I decided to daydream rather than focus on my schoolwork. I don't recall what was running through my mind at the time, but I do know I became transfixed on the aforementioned painting. I don't remember feeling called to focus on it. I wish I remembered that part. So I'm starting off directing my focus solely on this painting. I don't think it was long after that the top of the framing began to tilt off the wall and forward. The bottom of the frame stayed against the wall. It was only the top tilting. To be clear, the bottom of the frame wasn't supported by anything. There were inches of wall space between the bottom of the painting and the glassware of the table. After a second of what I now know to call what the fuck, I quickly stood up off my chair, as my initial reaction was to stop the painting from falling, probably thinking I'd somehow get in trouble. Now this is one of those 5 seconds feels like 5 minutes moments. Once I stood up off the chair, I can still remember my left hand grasping the back chair post and not letting go. I was frozen in place. My initial intent of rushing toward the painting immediately ceased, from what was probably shock of what I was seeing. I was so stunned that this picture I was staring at started to tilt forward and off the wall before my eyes. All I could do was watch. The painting fell face down, and again it fell in a tilting fashion. The top of the frame tilted forward close to 90 degrees, as the bottom of the frame remained against the wall without any support to keep it in place, and from falling straight down. The painting hit the glassware and the frame shattered. I can't remember if any of the glassware broke, but there was a loud crash and a mess. My mom came to the entry of the dining room and locked eyes with me as I still stood there, left hand grasping the chair. I explained to both of them what had happened, and I do remember they didn't get mad or punish me, but I didn't get the feeling they believed me. I will still mention it in conversation with them on a rare occasion, and I still get the feeling they think I'm exaggerating or not recalling correctly. But I will never forget that moment, as it was the first real, unexplained, and what I considered paranormal experience. Has anyone had a similar experience? Does anyone have an explanation to make sense of the physics of how the painting fell? I was 14 at the time. I had just moved downstairs because I wanted more privacy, as my parents were always checking in on me. I've always been a rebellious kid and wanted to be alone and do my own thing without anyone telling me not to. I had always noticed strange things happening around my house, and I kept asking my parents if they were going through my stuff in my room. They would always say no, so I just brushed it off. These things still happen to me to this day, like things being moved and waking up in a cold sweat with no explanation. One night, as I was on my phone, I felt this feeling of dread and anxiety come upon me. I then heard a voice say, "It's okay." And I looked up and a black silhouette of a woman was standing at the foot of my bed. She had no face, but I could clearly see the outline of a petite woman just standing there. I remember feeling very scared, but also very calm at the same time. I was looking at her for 15 seconds before she vanished. I told my parents what happened, and they were also scared because my dad would always say he felt a presence in the house. I instantly moved back up to the main floor. I remember telling people about it, and I would always remind them that my parents built the house, so there were no previous owners. People have given the idea that it was my grandma who passed away a year before this happened. I still question if this is true. I haven't had anything that intense happen to me again. I'm 15 now. I still have nightmares and also question what she meant. Why was it okay? I remember telling that to myself over and over. I'm thinking of moving back down soon, but for now, I'm good right back upstairs. In the 90s, my parents were renting a Victorian house in the countryside. It was fairly isolated, and that there were no shops or towns within a 25-minute walk. But not too far from a motorway, it was a little over an hour's drive to London. One weekend, my mum was gone to see her friends, and my dad was home alone. He recalls that nothing strange happened on the first Friday or Saturday, other than he got some time to himself and spent a lot of time cycling and messing around with his bike. On the Sunday, throughout the day, he said he felt a bit weird when he was on the property, as if something were watching him. He went about his day fairly normally though. In the evening, however, it felt extremely off to him. When he was making dinner, the gas stove kept turning off automatically, and at one point, he heard a crashing outside to find his bike knocked over in the shed. Nothing was too out of the ordinary, but it felt weird. When he was eating dinner, spaghetti bolognese if I'm not mistaken, the electricity in the house failed, and my dad reported that there was a sudden coldness in the room, which is strange because it was the middle of summer. The fuse box just blew and he quickly fixed it. After dinner, he went straight to bed, hiding under the covers reportedly. While in bed, the electricity went again, but he decided against leaving bed to fix it. It was at this point he heard the sound of a flute coming from the fireplace in the bedroom. He recalls to me whenever he tells me this story that he's 100% certain someone was playing a flute in the bedroom from the fireplace. He recalls the flute suddenly halting and hearing footsteps approach the bed. At this point, he had had enough, so went to fix the fuse. He notes not seeing anything strange, but that the house was very cold. When he flipped the fuse, the lights didn't turn on, and remembers looking towards the neighbour's house and seeing their lights still on. At this point, he went straight to the bedroom and slept like a log. This is the weird part. Apparently, after experiencing this, he reported it to the landlord, and the landlord told my dad one of the old tenants was an Irish music student who killed herself in that very bedroom about 20 years previous. When my dad mentioned the date, it matched up to the date she killed herself on. I'm not a superstitious or religious person, and neither is my dad. But that story is the only thing that sways my opinion slightly. I'm going to try and find the address to the house for my dad and see if I can find the ghosts someday. My dad has an older sister named Eva, named after my dad's younger sister, who died very young and under very strange circumstances that no one discusses, nor my dad knows. My grandpa had two sisters, Eva and another named Helen. Grand-aunt Helen used to believe very much in dreams, and from what Dad told me, she used to predict things via dreams like me. When Eva died, Helen saw her dreams telling her to tell my grandma, my dad's mom and her sister-in-law, that she will come back in the form of the new baby my grandma was caring for, and that they will give her her name. My grandma at the time had no idea she was pregnant. Helen told my grandma, who then told my grandpa, and together went to the doctor, who told them that they were indeed expecting. Eva was born and named as that. Many years later, Helen was close to dying when my dad introduced her to my mum after they got engaged, and my great aunt Helen smiled and said to my mum that she will make two strong fighter girls, that she will suffer heartbreak and loss as mother until those girls. My mum was a little creeped out by her, but smiled and thanked her. 9 months later, my mum miscarried a baby boy. Then a year after that, I came along, and I was a high-risk pregnancy, and my mum was worried about me, so she went to church, where the head nun, who was a family friend of hers, sat next to her and said that I would be fine and that I'm a fighter. Mum looked shocked at her, as I was told, because those words reminded her of the words by the now dead great aunt Helen. I was born dead. I choked by the umbilical cord, and all the doctors and nurses were ready to pronounce me dead. When my mum's very good friend, who was a nurse on the team, started shaking me while holding me upside down and softly hitting my chest to restart my heart. I was dead for 20 minutes before I came back. I was also premature, so I was stuck in hospital for 2 months. My sister was born with no complications, thank God, but she suffered a lot as a toddler with pneumonia, to the point she was close to death, but she pulled through. Recently, while I was told the first story from my dad about his Aunt Helen, Mum remembered what she had been told by her, and they told me how they are being surprised and shocked by how true her predictions are about me and my sister. Because both of us, as most of us I believe, face challenges, but the biggest ones are those that has to do with health, and I'm currently fighting to pull through. Every time I'm ready to give up, I remind myself of the words of my great Aunt Helen told my dad. Two days ago, my friend Catherine came over for dinner. My house has a hallway that leads to the bathroom, 2 bedrooms and the storage room. The moment we got inside my house and I went to the bathroom to get ready to go to the supermarket to buy what we needed to make dinner, she yelled and said, "Hey, the hallway's kind of creepy." The hallway doesn't look creepy, especially at 8 p.m. After we returned, we cooked and ate. Then the landline phone rang and I went to take it. It was my dad. And as I was talking, Catherine came to see if I was okay. And she avoided looking at the dark hallway, saying that it made her uncomfortable. Then, later at night, around midnight, I had to take something from my room, and she came with me, and I made sure I lit any light I could on the way there to help her when she turned to me and said that her brain suddenly got tingly, like she watched ASMR or something, and she got cold. It's summer where I'm living, and it's 29 Celsius degrees outside, so it wasn't cold. But after we left my room and went back to the kitchen/dining room, she told me my room and hallway gave her the chills and freaked her out and wanted me to keep the lights on. And in all honesty, I feel cold spots in the hallway ever since I started living on my own in the house. Or at least I notice it when I'm alone. But whenever I have family or friends over, I don't. But that day with Catherine, I could feel it too. But I thought I was getting freaked out too. And in general, during the entire night, we would talk and her eyes would drift either to the dark corner, where there is lights made out shutters, my aunt made, and to the hallway. That's when she left and went home. She told me that she felt that something was in the hallway and in the corner of my diner. She felt it, but couldn't see it. Catherine has admitted that in the past, she had paranormal experiences. And so do I, so I believed her. When she left, I made sure to say a little prayer before going to bed, because I felt kind of crept out. But I can't see it either, and yet I can't help but every night since then look at the corner and the hallway and get this chill down my spine. I don't know what it is, but I hope it isn't something evil and it's just a spirit. Friday, 3rd of January 2020, at 4:36 p.m. I, female 20, was cooking with my sister, female 16. She was boiling the pasta and eggs, and I was making chef's salad, meaning I was cutting the lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, and the cheeses and salami. When, because of time, I asked her to cut one of the cheeses when it happened. I was cutting the salami while my sister was cutting the regato cheese, when I felt a warm hand, the palm of the hand to be exact, slowly pushing me forward towards the table. The palm was at the left side and the place underneath your shoulder, same level with your armpit. The hand slowly removed its palm from me, and the place was numb, tingling and warm, but my entire body was instantly frozen. My sister and I didn't see anyone or anything, but she saw me how 1 minute I was joking about how the roles inside our household were reversed, and the kids did most of the chores while the adults were playing on their phones or sleeping, when I gasped and my body moved forward. Now, the first couple of seconds, my brain thought it was our dad trying not to scare me by touching me, because behind me is the terrace doors that lead to the room that was supposed to be the balcony. But my grandparents closed it and turned it into the sunroom that then leads to another set of terrace doors that lead to the master bedroom. We turned the sunroom into my dad's den, where he has his PC and his stuff for his hobby of building small army vehicles from plastic or wood when we moved in after Grandma died. But the fact that our dad could be heard snoring and I felt the hand scared me. My sister didn't freak out as much, but she got scared seeing me become white like snow from fear. When I explained to her what I felt, she told me that some days she feels the same thing, especially at night. A warm hand on her back before she falls asleep. She told me she thought it was only her tired mind playing tricks. Then I told her that many times I have felt shoves or someone touching while I do chores around the house. One time I was dancing and I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see if dad or mum or my aunt or my sister who were in the house were trying to get my attention, but I saw nothing. One time I felt it in my hair, like a stroke, after I woke up from a nightmare. 2 days ago, I was bolted awake, entire body jerked forward, because of nightmares that I can't recall. I just knew I was in danger when I felt the hand again stroking my hair. When I turned around, I saw nothing, just the Christmas tree that I thought I had unplugged. When I looked at my phone, it was 9:45 a.m, so I went and took my 10 a.m. pill for my Hashimoto thyroiditis. Then I fell back asleep. It's not the first time, but it was the first time it happened while I was with someone else in the room. I don't know if it's a friendly ghost of my grandparents or any other loved ones we've lost, and we've lost many in the past 2 decades. My best friend said that it might be muscle spasms, but why do they feel like a warm hand? Also, my sister complained a couple months ago that she feels watched in her room at night, and that's why she sleeps with the music on and covers her head. And I told her that it must be Grandma, since the room my sister is in was Grandma's favourite room. She used to pray in it and listen to the church on the radio when she couldn't attend. The house was built in 1978, and my grandparents sort of ordered it to be the way it is. And in 1983, my grandparents were the first residents. My house, along with the rest of the apartments in the building, were built in 1978 also. The area before it was a river and farms, according to my mum's knowledge. So what are your thoughts? Ghosts or something else? On February, I hit my head thanks to my mum's impatient behaviour. She brought the door of our family car's trunk on my head while I ducked to check if my laptop bag was in there, not knowing the fact that my sister had grabbed my laptop. So my hurt hand doesn't hold too much weight. I was bleeding from 7 p.m. up to 3 a.m. And finally, I was seen by a doctor at 5 a.m. after waiting in the ER from 8 p.m. Yes, my parents tried for an hour to give me first aid, and then we lost our way to the hospital because Dad and Mum had panic attacks, and my sister was crying because I was speaking two different languages at once, English and Greek. Well, I was speaking Greekish, lol. Anyhow, I was diagnosed with mild TBI, and for the second time in my life, I dodged stitches. At this point, I'd like to point out that the doctors didn't pay me much attention because Mum had already cleaned the wound and Dad bandaged it, and I was kept awake and talking. Yes, I had issues with my balance and my head was in so much pain, but yet again, the doctors seem to not really care for any patients, which brings me so much doubt in my diagnoses, because I was just given a piece of paper with the do's and don'ts of what I should feel for the first week. No meds or clean bandages or anything. Mum had to bandage my head again once we walked out of the hospital. And for the following weeks, it was very hard for me to write and talk. My writing patterns had never been the same as before, and neither does my accent in English and Greek. It takes too much time for me to find words and form sentences than before. Multitasking, loud music, low or too bright lights, fast exchanging lights, different colour lights, and even the smallest change of lighting and sound brings me headaches and migraines. With time, those things minimized, or at least I accepted them and based my life around them. But another thing is worrying me. I'm blocked. All my life, I used to have precognitive dreams, being able to remember my dreams, seeing dead relatives in my dreams, things that the women in both sides of my family were and are able to do. And so was I, until I hit my head. The day after I hit my head and I was allowed to sleep, it was the last time my grandparents visited me in my dreams. Yet, something else got unblocked. First was my emotions. I was never an emotional kid. I kept my emotions to myself and didn't show much. But now, I can't even pretend or mask them. Which isn't all that bad when it comes to my sister and I's relationship, but it was my weapon against my emotionally abusive parents. Now everything they say cuts like a knife, and I can barely keep myself from crying in front of them. I get so angry so quickly that I fear that one day I will rage blackouts again, just like when I was a teenager. Another thing that got unblocked was my empathy. I used to be able to control it, so I won't feel everyone's emotions at once, but now I do. And sometimes it confuses me too, because I tell if they're mine or somebody else's. In contrast to empathy and emotions, I've been experienced way too often the deja vu effect with past dreams I had, and awake precognitions like hearing my best friend Karen say she would do one thing, and I know in seconds that she won't because of how determined her voice sounds or how determined as a person she is, but because something else will block her from doing so. Or how I went to my mum's room because I felt that I was needed, and as I stood by the door, Mum called my name. And when I told her I was here, she looked at me, spooked. I felt urges to say things, like my sister went out with her friends today, and I turned and told her to tell her friend Sophia to check the dates on the milk she will buy. And my sister looked at me and said that they weren't going to the supermarket. But the moment Sophia came, she informed my sister that they need to go to the supermarket for milk because her mum is baking a cake. Or how I was sleeping in the car while we were going to my dad's village, and I woke up and told my dad not to take exit B on the street before his village, but exit A, because a tree trunk had fallen down then. My great-aunt Lisa told my dad about the event, and Dad looked at me, and I just tried to hide behind the glass of water I was sipping from. Also, the few times I do remember my dreams, it's numbers, random words, and music that a few hours later I either end up seeing or hearing about. I dreamed of the number 46 one day, and the afternoon of the same day, a car with the numbers 1546 sped down our road towards the maternity hospital, down the road and crashed into a pole while the woman was in labour and the boyfriend was under the influence of alcohol. Thankfully, everyone was okay, not the car. Lastly, I suddenly seemed to be getting past life visions at random while awake, and doing stuff while prior to that, I only had past life dreams. This experience has happened to my little sister, female, 16 years old, when she was 3 years old. I learned of it yesterday after my dad, her and I sat in the living room of our late maternal great-aunt Eugenia's home, and we were reminiscing about the old times when most of our grandparents were alive and living in this 3-apartments building, and how fun it was to meet for lunch and breakfast with them, and in general, having them and the cousins from Australia around. Those were the best family summers in mine and my sister's memories. And slowly the conversation shifted into the paranormal sightings our family has gone through, since the women in both sides of the family have some sort of gift. Dad started sharing his ghost sightings when my sister hesitantly shared this. Please note that the time of the event it was late in the afternoon, and I was present, but I was 8 years old, and I did notice that my sister was behaving weirdly, but I was too busy eating ice cream. The experience goes like this. She was 3 years old, and she was too bored to walk on her feet, so she started to crawl and pretend to be a dog, barking at our grandmas, when she met them in the hallway towards the first kitchen. Yes, we have 2 kitchens and 2 bathrooms. When my sister grabbed some water and then stole some pie from the fridge and went to the second kitchen to grab a plate. As she was eating, she saw great Aunt Eugenia and she was scolded for eating the desserts before dinner. Defeated, my sister returns to the living room and joined in the dining room and saw the rocking chair by the second terrace's doors, and it was moving, and an old man dressed in a tuxedo and smoking a cigar sitting on it and rocking back and forth while smoking. My sister recalls she had crawled to him and barked at him, which caused him to laugh at her and motioned for her to sit next to him. My sister then asked him who he was, and he says that he was great Uncle Takis, and he was just watching his siblings and his nieces and nephews, and now grandnieces and grandnephews. She sat by him for a while, and she played with some leaves that had been blown in by the open windows and terrace doors all around the house, when she asked him why none of our grandparents introduced him to us. He said that he didn't need to be introduced. He knew all of us and had been watching us. Then my sister stood up and said goodbye to him because she wanted to go outside to play with me. She then says she looked for him around the house, but couldn't find him. She asked around about Granduncle Takis, and everyone ignored her and said there was no one with that name. Flash forward to last year when my sister and our mum were going through some old documents and photos, when my sister found a photo taken in 1957, and it showed he was the eldest son of our maternal great-grandma, and he had died from cancer in that very same chair in 1958. And his real name was Christophoros Thomas Bozinikis, and he was great-uncle Temios, actually named Temios, the male equivalent of the name Eva, oldest twin brother. All my life, I felt very uncomfortable sitting in that chair, because I felt as if I was intruding. This experience happened 3 years ago, during the 2018-19 Christmas holidays and the first week of New Year. It was the first holidays without my maternal grandma, and the third without our paternal grandma. My parents were struggling in their marriage and their mental health. My little sister was 15 years old and was acting out, going to illegal car races, getting drunk, holding drugs for friends, smoking, getting into fights in school and out of school, just mixing with a bad crowd, including a gang that I had mixed up with 5 years prior. And they started stalking her because she was my sister, and in general, she was doing terribly in school. Our parents had left her be. They wouldn't parent her and only yell at her when they were in the mood to play the parents. She was by herself in her room. I was visiting every second weekend since I was away for college in an attempt to be in the loop. I wouldn't see my sister all the time. She was constantly out or in her room and wouldn't allow anyone to enter. The Christmas holidays came, and a week prior, my sister called me, crying in the middle of the night, which I was up studying for finals, and told me that she had nightmares every night and wanted to do something that would get her out of this funk. I decided to talk to my aunt about allowing us to stay at her house while she was visiting her boyfriend for Christmas, and she agreed. Then, I surprised my sister by visiting earlier than expected, and I had a hard conversation with our parents. I told them that I had noticed that things were tense around here, and I would get my sister to my aunt's house for the week leading up to Christmas, and be back for Christmas if the weather allowed, so they can have some alone time to work on what is going on with them. So, I took my sister and we returned to my college town where for 2 days, my sister watched me study and came with me to class while I wrote finals. It was the day of my last exam, and I had promised her that we will go Christmas shopping, or at least check the prices and items we wanted, and make a budget list, then go grocery shopping and make brownies or cookies, depending on which ingredients were cheaper. She was excited beyond words. She wasn't stopping singing and humming Christmas songs all day. It was a sight to see. But at the time, I was in between medications for my osteoarthritis chondropathy and Hashimoto thyroiditis, and I had vitamin D and E deficiency, and I was taking supplements for it. Plus, I was suffering from migraines and headaches for days on end, causing me nosebleeds, dizzy spells, and even fainting. I was praying that day I would be okay and didn't have to go home, but I wasn't. I woke up feeling like death. My head was killing me and my eyesight was blurring in and out of focus. I felt like I couldn't sleep properly. I cried in the bathroom because I was afraid. I did everything my doctors told me, took my pills and supplements, took a painkiller, ate a nice breakfast, and drank a glass of orange juice. I ignored the blurring vision all day, until I almost fainted at the grocery store. My vision went black for minutes, and then I was on my knees, with my sister calling my name, worried. She got me some dark chocolate muffins and an orange juice, and forced me to eat them as she went to pay for them. I ate a muffin and the juice, and I felt better, so I thought I could keep going. We finished our shopping, and my sister demanded that we go home, and that the rest could wait for tomorrow, and we could do online research if we had to. As we got out of the store, I saw a woman begging for money that looked so much like our maternal grandma, but with blue eyes instead of hazel brown ones. They could be twins if you put them side by side. My sister called out to me, but for some reason I felt compelled to go to her. I gave her the second muffin and a juice box my sister had bought for me. I felt like she needed them more than me. I was so dizzy in that moment, I thought I would collapse, and my nose was cold. Plus I had no control over my limbs. I was doing this out of instinct. As I handed her the brownie and the juice, she looked up to me. The look of true shock as she grasped my hands were cold, yet mine were a little bit warmer than hers. I was sweating like crazy, but when she held my hands and I looked at her face with blurry vision, dizziness, and the headache was gone. My breath was caught up in my throat as I looked at her shocked. She looked so much like my grandma. She said a shaky thank you as tears ran down her eyes and wished me happy holidays. I mumbled a weak "you're welcome," and then she let my hands go. Blurriness, headache, dizziness came rushing back, and the force made me trip over myself, and my sister had to catch me. She asked me why I did that, and why I wasn't answering her calling my name. I hadn't listened to anyone calling, and it had only been a couple of seconds, right? No, 5 minutes had passed. I was holding this woman's hand for 5 whole minutes, and I was frozen. People were looking at me oddly. I said I didn't know what happened, and we got on the bus. Then my nose started bleeding, and then I took my phone out in order to get it out of the way so I can reach for my tissues. I checked the time. It was 17:46, and my sister looked shocked at it and showed me hers, 18:03. She said that 17:46 was when we came out of the store. She checked it because she thought it felt it buzzing. The time on my phone reminded the same. For an hour, even though I restarted it twice, I had no signal nor Wi-Fi. As we were on the bus at 18:08, we passed by the same grocery store, and I looked at the window searching for the homeless woman. She wasn't there anymore. I searched for her twice more after that, but I never saw her again. I think of her from time to time, and I don't know why all of this happened. And if she was a ghost or an angel, my grandma trying to remind me to be kind and giving, like she was. My town doesn't get fogs in the town, only in the surrounding areas. It's surrounded by farms, mountains, factories, and 2 army bases. We do have humidity, but not so much to cause a fog while surrounded by buildings. My aunt was cleaning her room because she spilled something when she opened the balcony door to dust off her duvet and saw the fog. She called me to see it, and I instantly took my phone out and started recording. The fog was moving, she said, and I saw it too. Due to lockdown, our town at night is with curfew, so no one was out, and no stores were open besides the emergency pharmacy and a private birthing clinic I live near to. The weirdest parts are how fast the fog was moving and the first time seeing the fog move. How I had a headache the past 3 hours, and the moment I went outside, the headache stopped, only to start again when I went inside my house. It feels wrong to look at, and it doesn't show up on my camera. I've encountered fog before in other places, but I never cared. And it never felt this dry. It used to feel wet and cold, but it felt dry and cold. I've heard scary stories about fogs, which I didn't believe and chalked it up to superstition. But this feels different. I hope more doesn't come. And there was no weather report saying anything about fog. During the summer, I lost my great aunt Helena. She was my maternal grandmother's sister. My grandma came from Algio, in the region of Peloponnesus in Greece. So, we visited the family tombstone and paid our respects to the last departing grandparents. And God, that cemetery was so beautiful and well taken care of, and it had that peacefulness all around. It was publicly owned, which surprised me, because in Greece, cemeteries aren't that well taken care of, or at least those that I've visited. It was a shock. It was so big it stretched over a small hill, and it was at least 3 miles long if you walked around it. The earliest grave is from 1816, which shocked me. I felt so calm, like when I enter libraries. It was super hot the entire day, and in the cemetery, there was a perfect cool breeze, and yet I felt so warm and perfect. I felt at peace. When I visited my paternal grandma's grave, I feel this unrest and coldness in the place. That cemetery was cold and angry. The cemetery my maternal grandpa and grandma are buried in, the one I visited as a kid, had this restless calm. But the cemetery in IGO was a completely different experience. I'm in disbelief at what I experienced. I felt like I was being hugged by all my ancestors, that I was welcomed there. I felt the warm glow. Did I mention that? I didn't want to leave, but as I looked at the family grave and I said a soft hi and a nice to meet you in a low voice, so my parents wouldn't think I'm crazy. The moment I said hi and nice to meet you, I felt this warm hand on my shoulder, and I felt like crying. I'm blinking tears away while typing this, and I did blink tears away then too. I've never met my grandfathers. I never met my granduncles or great aunts, old enough to be able to have conversation with. I was 5 to 6 years old when I last saw any of them. I was 10 when the last great uncle died, and I wasn't able to go to the funeral. My paternal grandmother died before I could say goodbye, and so did my maternal grandma. My grandfathers died before I could meet them. It used to make me sad and wonder why and how things would be like. I had years of seeing dreams of them, of being with them in my great-grandpa's shop, or my aunt's house, or an old Athenian coffee shop from the 1950s, etc. I felt lighter and happier leaving, although I didn't want to. It's like I've made peace with how things are, and I knew they knew I existed, and that I loved them, even though I never met them and things were complicated with other family members, that they didn't hate me because I was related to them or was the offspring of them. And that was my most peaceful experience in a cemetery, and I wanted to share it. There are times when I'm in one place that is familiar, and I've been at many, many times before, but for that split second or few minutes, I don't recognize it or feel as if it's wrong. But just a few months before I hit my head and got diagnosed with a TBI, I was in my college city, and I was in a street I used every day, 2 or 3 times a day, so it wasn't normal to be this confused. The event goes as such. I was in Thessaloniki, Greece, aka my college city in the Aristotelius Square, and heading to Tsimiski Street to make my bus home with an old friend, when suddenly my friend is telling me that we were on the opposite side of Tsimiski Street and heading to Hagia Sophia Street. But I was explicitly telling my old friend that she's wrong, and the moment we reached Hagia Sophia's and realised that I was wrong, I felt terrified, sad and angry. I even cried a bit and had my old friend calm me down. That event struck me as very, very odd. I was so disturbed that I locked myself in my apartment for a few days, licking my wounds. I had a similarly emotional experience when I was in Gallipoli in Italy, when I was 18 years old, and I've never been there. Yes, I knew what to expect after a few corners and some buildings looked familiar and homey, and didn't want to leave. While in Lecce in Italy, it felt unwelcoming all around, yet familiar, and I just felt this feeling of danger, and that I had to flee. Ironically, during the pandemic, I found out that my maternal grandpa's family is hailing from a small village formerly known as Exmil in the peninsula of Gallipoli in eastern Thrace, modern-day European Turkey, during the 1910s before they settled in the central Macedonia region in Greece. This raised a few questions in my mind about my feelings in Gallipoli, since the Italian city is a settlement for the people that came from eastern Thrace, or at least for some people, but I thought it was a coincidence. So, my question is, what are these things that used to happen to me, where one moment I would recognize my surroundings, and the next not? and being so sure that it must be a different way, but I have no way to describe how different it must be with words I just know. Or do unfamiliar places feel familiar when they shouldn't? Any thoughts? So a few nights ago, I was going up to bed, and my partner was asleep in the lounge. I tried to wake him up, but he wouldn't, so I just let him as he looked comfortable anyway. When I went upstairs, I laid in bed on Facebook for around 20 minutes, when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs and into our room that stopped at the door next to our bed. Me just thinking it was my partner, I looked to the side and saw someone standing there. More like a black figure. It was dark, I couldn't make out any features. And looked back at my phone, thinking nothing. Now, this is when it freaked me out. I was still thinking it was my partner, and I saw him walk down the hallway. I thought he was just going to the bathroom. But then the bathroom door never opened, and I never heard the toilet. When I sat up in bed, I could see straight down the hallway, and it was dark and quiet. At that point, I knew it wasn't my partner, because there's no way he would be in the bathroom without the lights on. I went back downstairs once I calmed down, and he was still asleep. Safe to say, I made sure I woke him up, and he checked all the rooms and closets upstairs in case of an intruder, which wasn't the case. It was so weird, I can't stop thinking about it. And what brings me to tonight? It was less than an hour ago I was downstairs watching Netflix. Everyone is asleep upstairs, and I'm the only one down here. When I hear something in the kitchen right next to where I'm sitting. My kitchen, dining room and lounge are in the same room as it's an open plan living space. So I walked over to where the sound was coming from, and it was a ball from one of my son's toys lightly bouncing. It was the sound a ball makes when you play table tennis, for example. It was one of those small plastic balls. I just picked it up and put it away. Didn't give it much attention. I checked to see if there was wind, but all the doors and windows are locked. Our house is only 1 year old, so I don't think a draft would have been the case. I'm not too sure though. I can't have the feeling that this is the start of something. The house I lived in was a thatched roof house in the UK. It was the oldest house in the town. It's over 400 years old. There was a cemented up hole in the cellar, which was originally a tunnel to the local church, which was used for something to do with priests escaping during a line of persecution. Excuse my lack of history knowledge here. Probably Protestant versus Catholic clash of some sort. General eerie vibe when we were alone in the house. Not negative, but definitely bizarre. Once, my parents went on holiday and I watched the pets. Being 15, I had lots of friends over to begin with, all just drinking and getting high. But once the hype died down and I was at home alone, I didn't go upstairs for over a week. I slept on the couch next to the dog's bed, in the hope he would be an early alarm of any paranormal activity. There used to be a pamphlet in the local church with information about the town that had a paragraph about the history of the house. Sadly, I don't remember much about that, other than at one point the building was something to do with a dairy. And at another point early in its history, there was a fire which burnt a large section of the building. The first weird story happened the first day we moved in. Being a teenager in the early 2000s, my focus was making sure the TV and entertainment setup was sorted out. So I put all the DVDs and VHS tapes in a cupboard behind the TV. That's my first self-appointed task. This cupboard was empty when I put the various DVD boxes, etc. in there. The next day, I'm in the living room unpacking stuff. And my mum asked me what the hell was in the cupboard. Not knowing what she meant, I walked over and saw something on the floor in the cupboard. I picked it up
and it's an extremely rusted and perished rabbit trap. If you don't know what that looks like, it's like a bear trap with the jaws that snap shut, but smaller. My mum seemed kind of weirded out, but brushed it off. I know that cupboard was empty when I put all that stuff in there, and my dad had been taking the big stuff upstairs, not bits to the living room, and he had no idea where it had come from. I have no explanation whatsoever for how that could just appear. Bear this in mind for the other events though. The next one is funny, but paranormal nonetheless. We had stone tiled floor in the living room. My little bro was about 6 months old, maybe 1 year, barely crawling. So we had a big rug he used to roll out for him. Over the week, this would pick up dog hair from my dog, who would molt like hell. So we had to hoover this rug like fuck just to keep on top of it. One day, Mum had asked me to make sure I hoover the rug before I went out with my friends. It was my only task and I forgot to do it. I got home that evening and said hi to Mum, who enthusiastically thanked me for the fantastic job I'd done hoovering the rug for her. I instantly shat myself thinking, oh fuck, she's so pissed she's in sarcastic mode. I start apologising for not doing it, and she just looks puzzled and asks me what I'm talking about. The rug's perfect. I go into the living room and see this rug looking like it's been cleaned with a fine-tooth comb to remove all dog hair. I tell her I didn't do it, and that I'm sorry, as I have no idea how the rug is clean. I'm absolutely stunned, but grateful nonetheless at this point. My dad hadn't been home and certainly wouldn't have stopped in to randomly hoover a rug. So again, a very bizarre incident. What happened? Did a ghost use the fucking vacuum? Did whatever it was just vaporise the dog hair somehow? The mind baffles. It seems such an irrelevant story, but the fact I know it happened still gets me. The next one is again bizarre, but it was the first one that scared me because it was so specific. My parents were out and I had to walk the dog that day. I decided to leave by the back door but not lock it. It's a good place to live. Still, being a paranoid stoner, I decided I needed to hide the door keys. The bunch of keys also had the master key for my parents' car, which thanks to Alfa Romeo at the time, would cost more than £1,000 to replace if lost. So I decided to hide these keys well. I found a cloth bag used for holding coins and change in, and put them in there. I then hid the bag behind some books on a bookshelf. I took the dog out, got home, forgot about it, and went to play Vice City. Mum and Dad get home that evening and ask where the car keys are. I tell them in the bag behind the books on the shelf. We can't find them. I cockily think I've hidden these keys so well that my parents can't find them, so I go swanning downstairs thinking I'm the Mac Daddy. I then go get the bag off of the shelf, only to find there are no keys in there. My heart just fucking sinks. Instantly, I'm convinced someone has watched me through a window somehow and come inside and stolen the keys. There's no other thing that can have happened. My parents assume I'm too stoned and have forgotten and misplaced them, and get angry that I've lost the expensive car key and insist that I search the house. But my heart is still sinking because I know there's no point in looking under the cushions or on the sofa or behind the drawers because I put those keys in that bag. I half-heartedly look around the house, feeling upset, not knowing what to do. Also thinking some thief can take our car or break into the house at any time and it's my fault. After about 30 minutes of my parents swearing, my dad shouts from upstairs that he's found them in the back pocket of a pair of jeans underneath their bed in the bedroom. My parents look freaked, but brush it off. I'm super freaked at this shit, with zero fucking idea of how this happens. I was super relieved to have not lost the keys, but that made me realise that whatever that thing or those things doing this were, they were able to interact with physical objects in strange ways. I don't know how to describe it better than that. Apart from that, several times I heard conversations at night below my bedroom, but the room was an empty spare room. My bedroom door bust open at night, on a few occasions shocking me awake. This literally scared the fucking shit out of me. A strange coincidence was being at a party one night, age 16, and getting talking to some friends of friends. We're sharing ghost stories. I shared mine, and then these two brothers had stories about this house they'd lived in, which had paranormal activity. It sounded worse than my house. The conversation carried on, and it turned out that they lived in the same fucking house I was living in, about 4 years prior to my parents buying it. Things never got as bad as the brothers described, but I'll never forget that moment we realised we were talking about the same place. When I lived at this property, it was the first and only time I think I saw a ghost, but strangely enough, it wasn't in the property. I had taken the dog for a walk on the usual route, which took a path through some local woods. The path was one of those raised wooden walkways which weaved through forest and mildly boggy terrain. This was a path I had walked many times before, and sometimes felt a bit off-key, but put it down to paranoia. This particular day, it was around 6 p.m. in the summer, so it was still light. My dog stopped at the very start of the trail to take a shit, so I'm stood waiting and looking around at the woods. I look down the trail and something catches my eye. At first, it looks like branches moving in the wind, and I'm squinting, trying to make out what it is. And I'm sure it's branches moving, so I look away. When I look back up the trail, it looks like the branches are closer. So I'm moving around a bit, trying to get a closer look. The dog's still having a shit. I take a step forward and into focus. I see 3 women wearing those old-style bell-bottom dresses, side by side with their arms linked, moving at pace towards me. It's hard to describe. They were whitish, translucent, but still detailed enough for me to see that they were women in old clothes from a distance of probably 100 to 150 meters away, and they were moving fast. I'd always wanted to see a ghost, but the instant my brain realized what it was seeing, any previous idea on what I thought I wanted soon dissipated into the fumes of dog shit I was inhaling. I bolted, dragging the dog who was still having a shit. This all happened in about 10 seconds, and I ran until I got to the main road. I got home, and my mum said I looked pale and asked me if I was okay. She believed me, but looked more freaked out than me once I told her, so she didn't mention it again. I could see it play out in my head, and I always remember how scary it was, thinking you were actually seeing something that shatters what you know about life. A weird story I have from a friend of mine involves his mum's house. It's probably a 40-year-old house, but the local area is all old Saxon land. Lots of marking stones around the place. His front yard had a tree that was very old and rumoured to have been used for hanging at some point. He had lots of incidents of items moving or disappearing, hearing voices, hearing footsteps, etc. I wasn't there for this event, but my friend and 3 other friends were at this place, and I arrived about 5 minutes afterwards to find them all looking shell-shocked in deep discussion, moving around the room. They were all sat watching TV, when the wire on the telephone started to lift up in front of them and then begin to twist around and float in the air. One of them notices first and then asks if he's going crazy and asks if anyone else sees it, and then the others notice. It does this for 10 seconds or so before dropping to the floor. The discussion I walked into was them opening doors and windows, trying to recreate a gust of air to mimic the movements the phone wire made. But they couldn't. It was weird to walk into a room and see 4 people you know and trust having that conversation, because I knew they weren't lying. Something that still gets brought up in conversation every few years. Another house I lived in had an odd vibe. There was all old suitcases of clothes and old tat from residents in the attic from who knows when. But I remember there was a bus pass or passport of an older guy lying around. I'm 99% certain he's a ghost that stole a 10-bag of weed off of me here. It's easy to stereotypically say that I was probably high and lost it. At that time in my life, I knew exactly where every 0.01 grams of bud I owned was. I went to bed with this bag on the table at the foot of my bed. And when I woke up, it was gone. I rooted around and tore the place apart and didn't find it. The day I moved out of that house, I thought I'm finally going to find that bud. I didn't. I remember standing in my empty bedroom and saying something like, "That wasn't yours. I hope you enjoyed it." I went downstairs with the last bits and then went returning to the top floor to empty the spare room. Next door to my room, all I could smell was intense old beer smell. There was no beer spilled up there, so I took that as a sign of some old guy's ghost who liked to drink, who probably thought they'd try the herbal remedies for a change. A friend stayed the night in that spare room and woke in the middle of the night to see an old guy in full golfing clothes stood staring at him. He jumped up screaming, turned on the light and was gone. Those are my ghostly paranormal experiences. Like I said, not the scariest stories, but still weird as fuck.
This story takes place when I spent 6 months living in a trailer on a farm, trying to save cash on rent prices. The farm is located in a very small rural village and was a very peaceful place to live. I never felt there was anything odd or paranormal on the farm, but on a few occasions in the summer, I walked home after an evening shift, and once it got dark, the country lanes leading to the farm became a little less welcoming, and I would feel on edge. One of these situations where if you didn't give in to fear and look behind you, you'd be fine. But once you caved in and looked back, that was it for the rest of the walk. So just setting the scene, that the area itself was eerie once it got dark. It would have been mid-February, and we had recently had snow, so it was pretty cold. I'd fallen asleep with my fan heater left on, so I woke up around 1 a.m. sweating profusely, with a mouth like the Sahara Desert. I jumped out of bed and opened the top half of the door to the trailer. I was greeted by the nicest icy cold air and felt instant relief. The sky was black, but being in an area of zero light pollution, the stars shone brightly and the moon was almost full, so I could see across the fields for quite a distance. I was taking in this moment of peace and cooling when I heard a noise in the distance. It sounded like it came from behind the farmhouse and up towards the lane leading to the church, which also had several houses along it. The first noise sounded like a man briefly shouting. Bearing in mind I'd been asleep for a few hours and just woken up mid-sleep, so I wasn't on full alert. This didn't really bother me. I then heard the sound again, but it sounded like a higher pitched shout. This time it sounded more like a moan or wail. The sound begins to repeat every 5 to 10 seconds. The deeper moan followed by a higher moan. My mind begins running calculations of what this sound could be, based on where it's coming from, and the only logical thing I could think is that it was an old couple having sex with the window open. The village is mostly old people, so I didn't think it could be young people, and these sounds were not the ecstatic wails you would expect a young person to make out of pleasure. It dawns on me that no old couple is going to be banging the night away with the windows open, or be up the lane against the tree in this weather at this time of night. This focuses my hearing more as the noises begin to sound like they're getting closer. It was at this point my brain finally decided, yes, that sounds like two zombies taking it turns to scream that classy zombie noise in different tones. And it's without a doubt getting closer. There were two reasons I believe this was paranormal. Firstly, the feeling I got when I realised this sound was getting closer, and I couldn't identify it was exactly the same feeling as when I saw the 3 Victorian-looking ladies. Instant fuck this fear. I slammed the door shut, jumped back into bed, and held the pillow over my ears as I could still hear it. I was 30 years old at this point. The second reason I believe this is paranormal is due to reading an article in the local paper, around 4 years after this happened, about ghosts in the local area, and came across this piece. In another of Margaret's tales, she talks of a path from the village which skirted a pond,
and often flooded in bad weather, forcing walkers to take a different route along Hodman's Path. In order to put an end to the diversions, the decision was taken to deepen the pond. And during the excavation, it said that a skeleton was found in the mud, a millstone chained around its neck. The workmen began to recollect old stories told to them by their grannies of a wicked felon who, for his sins, was condemned to be buried at the four-reelet of Four Crossways, but for respect to his family was after all deposited in the pond, where he had Ian undisturbed ever since. The rector of agreed that the skeleton should be freed from his millstone, a punishment mentioned in the New Testament, and reburied close to the wall on the north side of the churchyard, just across the field. It turned out, a rash decision. Margaret continues, this wicked felon, relieved of his spiritual clog, rose at once from his dry and uncomfortable churchyard quarters, and nightly, with a horrid clanking of ghostly chains, rambles the unconsecrated space of glebe between the church and Lakers Lane. It is said that the ghost can be heard at night, clanking the chains it once wore. Now, I didn't hear chains, but the location given here, name changed, is exactly where I heard the noises coming from, which was the lane leading up to the old church. I don't live near there anymore, but when I randomly came across that article, my heart skipped a beat. Next story. I was around 13 years old, and my parents were looking to move house. They loved old properties with character. This was great, as we always lived in nice houses, which were unique, but they often came with a worry for me that they were haunted. The houses we lived in at the time for 6 months renting was an old vicarage, which was literally 2 foot from the local church. The living room windows on one side looked out over the graveyard. Ironically, I never had any paranormal occurrences in that house. We were moving from that house to a new one. One house we looked at was called something like the Bishop's Summer House. It was an old property that during the 17th to 1800s was used by a local bishop. This house was weird as fuck as soon as you walked in. I think either I'm paranoid or I can pick up on weird vibes due to the fact my parents never seemed to notice any of the weirdness at any of these properties. Maybe just me as a kid worrying about if we were moving into a haunted house. We walked in and instantly I didn't like this place. The old boy showing us around was quite eccentric, which wasn't an issue, but it just added to the vibe. The place still had bells attached to the strings, which ran from each room to the maid's quarters so that service could be called from any room of the house. The place was generally weird, but we walked in the dining room at the back of the house, and I swear to God, the temperature dropped a significant amount. You could almost see your breath. The lights were off and wouldn't work, which didn't help. I felt so vulnerable as a kid in that room, I just wanted to leave. He showed us around the rest of the house, and we came across his bed-ridden wife, who was sat up in bed telling us how she was going nowhere, and also talking general babble. Thankfully, we didn't move into that house. About a year after we had viewed this place, I was out with a friend and his mum and we were driving somewhere. They began telling me about a weird house they had gone to see recently, which was close by, and began describing how eerie the place felt, and how that they were there for about 5 minutes before they left. They both agreed that the place felt weird. They were talking about it because we were about to drive past, and lo and behold, it was the Bishop's summer house. So glad I never lived in that place. A story sort of tied to the 400-plus-year-old house. My mum had recently had my little brother, and she had gone from full-time workaholic to home mum. So she had got into fitness and well-being to keep herself entertained in the little free time she got. One of the things she decided to take up was Reiki sessions. I know very little about it, so excuse my ignorance of the subject. The story goes that she was in the living room having the session when the Reiki guy said he had a strange comment to make if my mum wouldn't mind. He said, I'm seeing the image of a man dressed as a Quaker in the corner of the room. Is that significant to you at all? Now, I don't know if there's a history of Quakers in that area, so I can't say if the guy was seeing a spirit of a ghost of a local person. For people that don't know, I believe that Quakers are a Christian subsect that believe the light of God is in all of us individually, not as a dogmatic experience. My mum was freaked out because as a kid, until the age of around 5, she says she used to have an imaginary friend, whose name I know but will not share, that was a Quaker man, that used to play with her, etc. Make of that what you will. It doesn't freak me out, but it makes me positively freaked, if that makes any sense. An unexplainable feeling that isn't a negative one. Next, we go to a local smoke spot I used to visit in my early 20s. This place was rural and a drive away from main roads. We went to a small parking area next to some train tracks. You could either stay at the parking area and be surrounded by fields behind and forest to the front and sides, with the train tracks going through the forest, or if you crossed the tracks, you could follow a trail through the woods to the local river. One summer evening, myself and a friend made the trip to the river and enjoyed a lovely smoke in serene nature. We had a great time, so we were in a good mood heading back. It wasn't dark yet, about 9 p.m, but it doesn't get dark until 10:30ish around here in summer. We were walking back down the trail, and it was like we were in full conversation until we walked past a certain tree, at which point we sort of just died off talking to each other and began walking in silence. Although this trail passes through woods, it was by no means a scary trail. We had walked this way many times during the day and never thought anything of it. I sometimes feel places are eerie during the day, which is why it shocked me how much we were crapping our pants walking along this trail. We managed to hold it down until the car came into view, but at that point, it was like the subconscious mind kicked in and went into run motherfucker mode for both of us. I almost dropped my keys, fumbling them in my hands, trying to open the car doors. We got into the car and away without incident, but both still talk about how the atmosphere changed so dramatically. But neither one of us wanted to say that we were shitting it until we both ran like lost lambs. This just sets the scene for the weird story that took place here. Another time I had finished work at midnight and went to meet a friend for a smoke at the parking area near the train tracks. Unfortunately, I arrived first, so before I had even parked up, I knew that my mind was going to be focused on what lay just the other side of the tracks I was parked next to. I reluctantly parked up and began to roll a joint. It was summer, so even at night it wasn't super cold. I had my driver's side window open, the opposite side of the tracks. My engine wasn't running, so it was just me skinning up in darkness, listening to crickets chirp. I thought I heard something, so I looked up. The view I should have had was across a small field and then woods straight ahead on both sides. It was of course dark, so anything beyond 30 feet from me was black. Out of nowhere, the following appeared. One by one, a blinding flash of light took place at the edge of the woods. About 15 lights starting from left to right. As one finished lighting up, the next in line would ignite, and then the next one, and then the next one. Each flash came with a noise, which I can't really describe, sadly. It became fast. I'd say the first one flashed, then there was a second delay, then the other 14 or so all flashed within about 2 seconds. My brain enters warp speed and decides lampers. Lampers are dudes that ride around farmland in trucks, sometimes legally, with big spotlights on top. They're generally looking for hare, rabbit, and other game to hunt at night, and they use the big lamps to catch the creature's eyes in the darkness. Seems logical, until I then realised that there's no way 15 lampers are parked side by side in a small field, not wide enough to fit those trucks pointing their lamps at me. Brain was out of options at that point, so I fired the ignition and drifted my BMW 5 Series out of the car park at speed, with the lights off, I might add. I didn't want to be sending communication to whatever the fuck was in that forest. Met my friend driving the other way up the road. He asks what's happening and I explain. He looks at me like I've already had too much to smoke. We decide to head up there, him leading the way, so I turn around to follow. We get to the parking area and he has his lights pointing across their field. There was nothing there. So even if someone had equipment required to pull that as a stunt, they wouldn't have been able to get away in the 3 minutes between me leaving and returning. Also, the fact there is nowhere to access that point by vehicle or anywhere close by to park and walk equipment there leads me to think something weird as fuck happened.
I'm one of those people who are very skeptical and wouldn't spend my time entertaining the thought of ghosts if it wasn't for my own experiences and the testimony of my family members who grew up in this paranormal location. Before I begin the story, I want to make an observation on behalf of the separation of these instances. Not only was there a plethora of really strange activity in this one location that continues to this day, but these incidents seem to follow or correlate with my grandmother. Now, when I was younger, my dad mentioned to me that when he was a boy, he lived in this house opposite a graveyard, in which he grew up in a short while. But in the late 90s, it was in this house that many bizarre, unexplainable things happened, such as phantom music or church choir music being heard within the house, but all attempts to locate the origin of the sound failed. Loud crashing noises like dishes falling that would shake my grandmother, only for her to come into the kitchen and find everything in its place. There were also violent banging on the doors that would have her ready to yell at the kids to knock it off, only to find my dad and uncle in their room with the same confusion. She also recalled eerie dreamlike states, with a woman in a wedding dress hovering over her bed at night. Now, as wild as that sounds, all three people living in the house had shared experiences. I had no reason not to trust them. They moved from there and kept these memories. It wasn't until later in my childhood that I witnessed it for myself, all while being with my grandma at the time. In an entirely different house, mind you. One day, during a conversation in the kitchen, an aerosol can was knocked off the counter in between us. It fell from the island counter in the middle of the room and hit the tile floor. We both just kind of stared at each other with a shocked look and laughed it off. Then probably a year or so later at a new house, in the middle of another conversation, a loud door slammed. Keep in mind, these were gated houses in isolated counties, with little to no possibility of someone coming knocking. Once we investigated, nothing. Me and my two friends were coming home from a movie, and they were about to drop me off at my house. It was around midnight, and we were just down the road from my house and at the entrance of my neighbourhood. We saw a person. It looked like someone was out walking. Who would be doing that at midnight? Anyway, one of my friends said, "Watch them not be there when we get up there," or something along those lines. The person turned and started walking back up the road towards where the houses would be. There's a line of trees blocking the road, so as soon as the person turned and walked back up the road, we could no longer see them. Also, on the other side of the entrance, across from the trees, there's a graveyard. Once we got to the entrance, which was only like a 5-second drive, we no longer saw the person. We were all tripping out because not only did one of my friends call that he wouldn't be there, there was also nowhere that they could go except up the road. The only other way they could have disappeared that fast is if they darted into the trees. We pulled into my driveway and we all started talking about what we saw. One of my friends said they saw someone dressed in blue. The other said it looked like a construction worker vest. I saw a hooded figure dressed in black, not like the Reaper, more like a jogger with a hoodie on. Once we all said what we saw and confirmed no one was lying, we got even more confused because there's no way we all seen something different. Later that night, I was wondering what it could have been. Eventually, I fell asleep, and for the first and only time ever, I'm not kidding, I had sleep paralysis. I woke up to see a figure dart across the side of my bed, then the front of my bed, then it went on the ceiling, then jumped down at my face, and after that, I snapped out of it. The figure didn't look like anything but a black blob. But what freaked me out even more is that I'm the only one who saw the person at the entrance of the neighbourhood as a black figure. I still have no idea what it was to this day. Nothing has ever happened after that. So this weekend, my husband and I made our first trip to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We stayed at an inn that was once inhabited by a girl named Tilly Pierce and her family, and during the Civil War, the house was a makeshift hospital. I've never had any experiences with the paranormal, so I wasn't expecting to, even though it said this house was haunted. The first night we stayed there, Sunday, we decided to take a walk around town around 9:30 to 10 o'clock at night. While we were getting ready, the light on the nightstand was flickering like crazy. Creepy, but could be unexplained, so we just unplugged it. We headed out for a walk, and no one was out. It had just rained and the bars and restaurants were closed, so not much to do, but we were new in town and wanted to scope things out for the daylight. We got back in at almost midnight, climbed up the creaking stairs into our room. To briefly describe our room, it was a street view room that sat above the dining room area of the house. The other guests in the inn were fast asleep by the time we got back. We sat on the bed for about 10 to 15 minutes, and out of nowhere, we heard a young girl start singing. I'd say mid-song, no music. The song sounded like some type of hymn, or maybe a popular song among the young people of that time. After about 30 seconds of singing, a muffled woman's voice, almost scolding, said something like, "You're 15," and that's all we could make out. Again, no one was on the sidewalk, and we saw the other guests and no young girls were in attendance. The sounds came from directly below us in the dining room area, and we had just walked in about 20 minutes prior to a darkened house. We both looked at each other in shock, but still didn't register that it could be a spirit that we just overheard. Monday came and went, and Tuesday morning we gathered for breakfast in the dining room table of the inn with the other guests. The innkeeper was talking about the history of the house, and had mentioned that he brought a psychic into the house, and she had felt the presence of a young girl, possibly Tilly. Another guest says, wasn't she 15? My husband and I practically broke our necks looking at each other when we recalled what we heard Sunday night. Now, Tilly didn't pass away in the house, or even Gettysburg, but could it be a residual haunting? We both heard it so clear and loud, it was like we were hearing a snippet of a memory, but it wasn't bad or scary. It was actually very beautiful.